Hey, everybody. Patrick Connor here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. World's crazy, boxing's crazy. That's how it's going. Here with my boy Aris Pina. We're talking history, a little bit of current events, or at least history inspired by current events, but stuff's wild. What's up, Aris?
What's going on, my man?
Man, we've talked about this on the show before in different eras of boxing. The boxing itself seemed to kind of reflect the world going on around it, all the stuff going on in the 80s, crazy drugs and stuff like that. That basically, influenced what was going on in boxing. Same thing with the steroids and shit in the 90s, etc. World's going crazy right now. So the boxing is crazy right now. I some of it I don't even know if we want to get into. But this week we got, AJ, Anthony Joshua taking on Francis Ngannou, one of the wild entrants, like as a debutante, knocked down Tyson Fury and stole a few rounds, surprised a lot of people. So we got to talk about heavyweights from history who shot their way to the top very quickly. I mean, that's just kind of the topic of the hour right now.
Absolutely. It's going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to the fight tomorrow a lot, just because of the intrigue of it and the fact that I'm working it. It's going to be a long day because I think we have like six fights we got to count. But I worked the last show that we did, so that was Ngannou against Tyson Fury, and we've covered that on the show and talked about it and all that, and that was absolutely fascinating. All right, because we all expected that Fury would just kind of blast past him, and rightfully so, considering the depth in sport and all that stuff, but. Ngannou showed himself, as we talked about, to be a level above anyone expected. I mean, the guy clearly knew how to box. Like he didn't look like a fish out of water, like a lot of MMA guys do when they go into boxing, or vice versa for that matter. And he had if only he threw a little bit more, he just probably would have won that fight. I think it was still like nerves and dealing with, okay, would I have enough stamina to go the amount that I have to, and yada yada yada. But like he took some massive shots in that fight. Um, Showed that he had a good chin, was able to counter off of it. He was rough in there, and he handled himself very well. Even besides the knockdown, he just looked like he belonged in that ring. Even though Fury clearly wasn't at 100%, it was still extremely impressive on Ngannou's part. Impressive enough that he got ranked by the WBC, and he's right back in there fighting Anthony Joshua. I mean, the fight's being held in Saudi Arabia. The Saudi Arabia over there has already shown that they're kind of big on the heavyweight division and different matchups of that sort, and they have enough money that they could throw around that these fights can come to fruition pretty easily. So that's where we're at right now with this one, and it's going to be intriguing, man. AJ looked really phenomenal in his last fight, destroying Otto Wallen, and even though Wallen's not like elite or whatever, no one's really blasted him like that. And Joshua had flashes of his old self. You know what I mean? There was not really any confidence issues. There was not any like trepidation or anything with him. He looked really good. And he said he's feeling great with Ben Davidson now and that he feels, rejuvenating his career. And he's been very active, considering the way the world is right now in boxing and how many times these guys fight a one off here and there and yada, yada, yada. Like, it's to the point that, like, Joshua has been fighting, what, four times in the past year and a half or whatever it's been. That's good activity. It's kept him sharp. And when things way things have happened, he initially was supposed to be fighting Deontay Wilder at this point. But with Wilder being upset by Joseph Parker and Ngannou himself, looking so good against Fury, here we are now. I'm not complaining about it. I still think it's a very intriguing fight.
Even had no sanctioning body wanted to rank Ngannou, which is possible, I guess, but had none of them wanted to touch it, this still would be an intriguing fight for the fact that, I mean, with all due respect to Anthony Joshua, skill wise and in terms of self awareness in the ring, he's not Tyson Fury. And so that makes this a lot more intriguing. And also, it kind of like what you were saying before, it leads me almost to believe like Francis Ngannou might have actually orchestrated some of the shit that was released from his training going
Mm,
into the Tyson Fury fight on purpose. Like they used like the worst possible clips of like on his first day of training or some shit, because
yeah.
some of that shit didn't look good. Like he looked slow, he looked really deliberate, and I remember thinking like, this is gonna be bad. And then he went in there, he was smooth, he had a nice jab. I was like, he
Mm.
fucking with us, bro? I think he might have been fucking with us, dude. But I also think that, obviously that element of surprise, it was helpful. Tyson Fury coming into the fight looking like a sack of fucking laundry, also helpful to Francis Ngannou, not Tyson Fury. But like, it was just basically the element of surprise was big. Does he need the element of surprise against Anthony Joshua? Perhaps, perhaps not, and I think that now the cat's kind of out of the bag. He can't really act like, oh, he's not like a fucking pool shark coming in like, oh, I don't know how to play. And then he's cleaning up the fucking table and like taking everybody's money. Can't do that. You can only do that once. You can't keep going into the same fucking pool hall and do that over and over and over. And that's where Tyson or Francis Ngannou's at right now. He's kind of like the cat's out of the bag. Anthony Joshua is well aware of what he's capable of doing in the ring. And so that element of surprise is gone. But again, will he need it against Anthony Joshua? I don't know, man. I don't know, but it definitely I think is an intriguing fight, especially because of our topic that we're talking about today. Because Anthony Joshua fits the bill of the same thing. Francis Ngannou, he's kind of got fast tracked to the top for a number of different reasons. His amateur success primarily, but like that this is an intriguing fight. I'm not gonna lie, dude. I know that it's really tough to digest for a lot of people because of where it's taking place and the mechanisms behind that. I'm with you.
Right.
I get it. I'm with
Mhm.
you. However, uh, can I do anything about that? No. Can you? No. Can any of you guys listening, watching? Not really. So at this point, it's kind of like, well, I'll just kind of accept it for what it is, as much as a cop out as that is. But it's an intriguing fight. It really is.
No, I mean, it's one of those fights too that, like you said, Joshua has been hurt before. I mean, he's been stopped before, and he can be hurt. His confidence can be rattled, and you've seen in the corner too. Like when he's been hurt, like you've seen him asking questions to his corner. What should I do next? What do I got to do to block him? Like especially in the first Ruiz fight, where he had all that doubt, and I mean, we found out afterwards he was concussed, so he probably didn't even know what was going on half the time in there. But still, um, Joshua has gone through some issues, in fights and stuff like that, like med fight crises. And early in his career, like he got through it with Klitschko. But clearly, after that fight, there was like a little bit of a difference in how he approached fights from then and how he started approaching fights after that. Because Klitschko definitely rattled him, dropped him hard, and put a beating on him for a few rounds before Joshua was able to come back. But it's like, it's interesting because you don't know when you look at it on paper, you just kind of think of this fight like, okay, Joshua should be able to beat him up and stop him within 5 rounds because Fury just was out of shape. He didn't look good, whatever it may be, and that just kind of enhanced Ngannou's um, performance for that fight. But Joshua, is going to come in tip top shape. He's on a roll. He's feeling motivated. He has a chip on his shoulder also too because he feels like this is a guy that's inferior to him, and he wants to make a statement that a guy that Fury struggled with as bad as he did, he wants to one up him and be able to stop him. So,
Right.
and that, yeah,
That's
there's
the undercurrent too, is like the kind of feud or whatever between Tyson Fury and AJ, where they've
mhm,
been talking about that fight for fucking years. It's come close, hasn't happened, and now this is kind of their chance to like, if it's gonna happen.
exactly. And so if that's going to happen, then, that's all the motivation that AJ needs to go out there and try to put on a dominant performance. We'll see if that can play in Ngannou's hands. I mean, Ngannou showed that he can counter and he's not afraid to let his hands go when, engage and stuff like that. So there's going to be fireworks in this fight. I I personally think, I mean, you got to favor AJ just off of everything, but Ngannou's a wild card, and I would not be surprised if he clips AJ and would be able to stop him. I can't wait to work it.
And we haven't really seen, and granted, we haven't seen Ngannou in a boxing ring as many times, so that's a fair point to bring up. But we have seen him get punched a lot and kicked
Yeah,
and kneed and elbowed and shit. So I mean, it's not like we don't know how he absorbs a blow, but like we don't know exactly how he takes punches from a strong puncher. And Anthony Joshua, for any of the bad things you can say about him, the dude can put them together and he can knock your fucking block off. If is he the same kind of natural puncher as like Deontay Wilder? No, he doesn't have the same kind of natural delivery that just fucking blammo. But he's he's a hulking fucking beast, and he's the kind of guy where his punching power has seemed to have increased with his muscle. and he's a very hard puncher. And you stand there in front of him, Francis Ngannou included. I got to think that it's going to be a bad night for him, but he's not going to stand there for him. I think Francis Ngannou, one of the things that he also showed against Tyson Fury is that he's clever. He's not just like some novice that doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. I thought that that's what we were going to get, and I was wrong. Like, and when he finally got in there, I was like, whoa, he's kind of doing some shit in there that's like timing wise, he was timing Fury really well with his jab and jabbing with him. There were a couple rounds in a row where Tyson Fury had this look on his face like, what the fuck is he doing? Like, he's out jabbing the shit out of me, and I'm kind of distressed. I'm I'm distressed. So it was fucking yeah, man. It was a surprise. So yeah, again, can he pull that off against AJ? I'm with you. I think you got to favor AJ, and if you're putting a gun to my head or making me put money on it or something like that, I'd probably go with AJ, but like not with a lot of confidence, dude. Not with a lot of confidence.
Absolutely. Um, I mean, I don't think the fight's gonna go to distance. That's the only thing I have confidence in.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably the safest bet, I would imagine.
True. I'm just excited that's gonna end early as well. So
Dude, I mean it's the let's see how many fights on the card are fucking heavyweights. One, two, three, four, five. All right, so there's five heavyweight fight. Oh, okay. Well, Roman Fury is on one of them, so that barely counts. Nonetheless, yeah. But the other big fight, though, Big Bang Zhang, Joseph Parker, this, like you said, Deontay Wilder was supposed to figure into this whole equation a little bit more. And I mean, it would be more fun if he were. I mean, let's just be honest. He's the kind of guy where one way or another somebody's getting hurt or stopped or knocked out, or if not, then there's at least going to be some sort of weird mental breakdown in the ring afterward on Instagram or some shit. So regardless, since Deontay Wilder wind up losing to Joseph Parker, that puts him in a position to take on Zalil Zhang. Big Bang Zhang, who has also kind of positioned himself as, like you said, he's the kind of wild card who's got a little bit more heft to his record and
mhm.
has positioned himself to maybe take on a heavyweight champion at some point in the very near future. What is he, like 39 or something like that? So I know
Oh yeah,
times.
yeah, he's definitely up there. But at the same token, heavyweight division has been known historically, especially in the more recent times, that older guys can still thrive in that division. And I just find it more fascinating in the case of Zhang that here you are a few years ago. It looked like he was on the verge of death, and apparently he actually was after a
That's
fight.
so crazy.
Where what did they say that like it was like sugar and everything he just left like he was just
He had some sort of kidney issue, I think, where he had like, and he wasn't able to process all of his shit correctly, and like, yeah,
it was,
like I mean, like that can lead to like awful electrolyte imbalances, which sounds like, oh, you drink Gatorade, but no, like that could kill you.
and somehow he lasted the distance, which is incredible. But think about that. He's gone from that. He went to, arguably getting robbed against Hergovich, which a lot of people thought he won that fight. I especially
Yeah,
did. And
he
look what he's
yeah he
done.
won that fight.
Yeah, and look what he did to Joe Joyce twice, man. The first fight, which I worked, he just beat his face into an absolute pulp until Joyce looked like the Elephant Man at the end of it. And then the second fight, Joyce, who was known as like Juggernaut and a guy that was like he took so much punishment that people were like thinking about one day, what if he fights Deontay Wilder and if he can survive his right hand, what would happen? I mean, Zhang just blasted him like he was nothing. And
Yeah,
so he has some truly scary power in that division too, and he can box. Like he's a guy. He's not just a waiting in type fighter or nothing. He knows how to move, and he's a southpaw on top of that. So that's a good fight.
dangerous.
Him and Parker were going to make for a good fight. Parker's not the type of guy. He's a boxer who is not afraid to engage himself.
Yeah,
So
get sucked into brawls a little bit too easily. I think that's one of his biggest faults. He's a very good fighter, but that's probably one of his biggest faults. And also he gets cut. But
yeah,
like, he's not gonna go in there to lie down. So that's gonna be
absolutely not. I mean, he's coming off the biggest victory of his career when he outboxed Wilder the last time out. So he's riding on an all time high in terms of confidence. So
he's also I didn't know this until like a couple years ago. He's apparently like super popular in New Zealand, like on like on social media. He's like one
Mhm.
of the biggest like social media stars apparently. I don't know. He's quite the character.
Cedric probably would have had something to do with him if he was still around when, because Cedric was promoting Tua way back in the day and always going to New Zealand and all that.
That's a place that would be cool to visit at some point, I think.
I always was hoping to do that. Like, said would go to New Zealand, not to get off track too quickly, but like it's a 15-hour difference, so I would actually like it when you go because he'd be there for like a week and I'd be in the office by myself for like the entire day until not doing anything until like he'd call me up at like 5 p.m. or something because he'd finally be waking up. And I'd be like, yo, man, listen, I'm leaving in an hour. So whatever you gotta do, you better get it out of system now. Oh, what emails do I have? Okay, here's your email, blah, 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 blah. I need you to write to somebody to do this. Okay, I need you to do that. But hey, said it's 6 o'clock, gotta go. Bye. But yeah, boxers out there, if it's not a, I mean, it's a popular sport, but there hasn't been like too many major names that have come from over there. And so to get a guy like Tua, who, in the 2000s and stuff when he was like, fighting more and more over there and Cedric was bringing events over there, like the one against, was it Shane Cameron?
Hmm.
That was a massive event, massive, massive event. And when Tua blasted him, everyone got excited again, thinking, he was going to be like revert back to the 90s. But fortunately, it didn't happen that way. But I mean, yeah, like I can see Parker being huge there, and if he's able to pull this fight off too, shit.
Well, I know that David Tua got like really he got in not good shape and he wasn't doing super well health wise, but now he has been training again.
Dude, he is a unit.
He's always, even when he was out of shape, he was just just a massive human being. But nonetheless, like he's I guess like muscular again now, and
Oh, I've
you know,
seen the videos, bro. He's over there absolutely like ripped. Just, I mean, just looking like a redwood, and he wears flip flops to the gym
yeah,
because
he's
of
just
course
wearing
he
like
does.
board shorts and fucking
Yeah,
tank top. Guy's a fucking legend. Jesus Christ,
wearing flip flops, going over there lifting massive weights like it's nothing.
fucking legend, dude.
So
Well, I wish he were on this card, or with all this fucking talk with Mike Tyson coming back and all that news shit. Who knows what the fuck's gonna happen? Because he ain't even as old as Mike Tyson. Don't get
true.
any ideas. Don't get any ideas. But nah, dude, it's I'm not gonna lie. This is not like the most highly anticipated card top to bottom. It's mainly about Anthony Joshua versus Francis Ngannou. It's an enticing enough, fight as is. And also they came out with that fairly cool little cartoon graphic-y looking
Of a
thing.
Street Fighter.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was actually really cool. I'll give them that for
Yeah.
sure.
I'm not gonna lie. Some of the stuff they've done promotionally has been pretty cool. Not gonna lie. Um, but that actually brings us, like I said, the kind of quick road to the top, fast tracked heavyweights, etc. Anthony Joshua was one. He was I believe, was a super heavyweight gold medalist, right?
Yeah.
In 2012 Olympics. And I mean, somewhat fortunate, I would say, perhaps to win his last two fights at the Olympics, in my opinion. He could have lost both of those, and in the eyes of many, should have lost both of those and would not have gotten a medal. But nonetheless, he won them, became a super heavyweight gold medalist, and again was kind of given the quick push toward the top. I think was also somewhat fortunate to make it into a division that was crumbling on the heels of Klitschko's dominance for such a long time. Many of the fighters had already kind of been laid waste to and whatnot. So it was a good time for him then. And also, again, Francis Ngannou. Dude, can you imagine going nearly 2-0 if he beats Anthony Joshua, going nearly 2-0 against Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua in your first two professional fights?
I mean, that's one of the most incredible starts in boxing history. It has to be, right?
That's pretty wild. I mean, dude, there's a whole bunch of fighters from like Thailand, handful from South
Oh,
Korea
I know that. Yeah,
that like, fought and, got world titles and like a few fights into their career and stuff like that. So, it's all good. We're not going to go all over all of that shit, but nonetheless, fucking Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua in your first two professional fights, win or lose,
that's
is pretty
incredible.
wild stuff. So, what are some feats in history or some fighters in history? perhaps they didn't go quite like that, but still, who are some guys who fast tracked their way to the top, Eris?
I mean, you got to go with the first person you got to bring up. Obviously, is probably the most famous one to be known, and my good friend, the late great Leon Spinks.
The quickest road to the actual heavyweight championship, Leon
I mean,
Spinks.
they got to do a documentary on something like that. Like, it's what a fascinating, tragic, crazy. So many words you can use about it, but his story needs to be something.
Funny, like lovable, hilarious.
Leon was the most lovable, funny guy you could meet. If every time you met him, you just wanted to give him a hug, and he would give you one, and you just wanted to hang out with him. Like everybody loved Leon. The most happy-go-lucky. To know Leon was to love him, but you know, anyone that's ever had a chance to meet him would know that. But we're here to talk about his career. You know what I mean? And Leon Spinks, yes, he's a parody. Yes, he's been known, easy to joke on, and everyone has in the past from Richard Pryor all the way up till current times, and it was easy to. You see him with his missing teeth, and you see the way he dressed and his cowboy hats and all this other stuff, and it was easy to poke fun at him. But Leon Spinks, before he fell apart, was a hell of a fighter. This dude was a beast, all right? A hell of an amateur who won the gold medal in the Olympics, a part of the 76 team. And if you watch his gold medal match, which is on YouTube, um, I don't think it was Sixto Soria. I think that Sugar Ray Leonard beat Sixto Soria. So I don't who did he beat for the gold medal? I
Now
should
I'm gonna
have
have
his
to look.
yeah, hold on.
No,
I can
you're right. It was Sixto Soria.
was Sixto Soria?
Yeah.
Okay. So that was a absolutely raging fight right there, right? If you watch that one, you already got to take like an understanding of what Spink was about. Just a tank who didn't box, with the pedigree of a guy like Howard Davis or Sugar Ray Leonard or like some of his other teammates, but he made up for that for just being an animal. Like you know what I mean? He was strong as Knox. He was a churning puncher, and he could hit hard. And Soria got knocked around early on, came back, started battering Spinks around in that fight, and they're going back and forth. Howard Cosell is going horse at that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Which
his call of just that amateur fight is just like, oh shit,
I
he's
mean, it
he's
was
loving it.
really good. Like you see, he's like, Spinks was an outboxing
Oh,
scout. Look at the way the
oh,
bullet is coming back. What a fight. And then all of a sudden, Spinks goes running across the ring and lands this caveman right hand. Boom! And Soria just folds like an accordion, just in sections. Right? And all the way to like his leg flopping down to the end. And you hear Howard Cosell, oh, like you said, the right got him. And I mean, that's the making of a star right there. That's the type of
yeah.
performance
And
you want.
Howard didn't usually get like that, even with good fights too. But he was getting hype.
I mean, it was a great fight. Like, Soria was an incredible amateur himself who wasn't known to get knocked around like that. Spinks was, it was a wild back and forth shootout that Spinks was able to stop dramatically. So that put him on the fast track, all right? Him, Michael, Sugar Ray Leonard, obviously, Howard Davis, John Tate, all of them were going to be featured on television right away. Spinks, surprisingly, though, was put in as his career started right away. Like it wasn't like he was being babied or anything like that. These were like tough ass guys. He was being put in pretty quickly. If you look at his first three opponents, first one was 8-7, pedestrian record, but a guy that's kind of experienced. And I mean, the rest of his teammates almost like turned pro against some similar ilk. 13-8 for his next one, but then you see in 1977 he fights Pedro Augusto, who was a notable heavyweight at that time, with a record of 28-8. And Augusto had been around the block. He'd fought his fair share of guys, never really reaching the elite level, but he was one of those handful of tough, mid range. I wouldn't call him a contender, like a gatekeeper. And Spinks blasted him. And this is only his fourth pro fight as he does this. You know what I mean? Spinks blasted him in the first round. Before 2 fights later, he's already in there with Scott Ledoux. Now, Scott Ledoux is a ranked contender. Scott Ledoux is a grizzled veteran who's not a top guy in the division, but has fought everybody, would go on to fight for the heavyweight championship, score a couple of notable wins himself, would go on to fight a draw with Ken Norton, would fight everybody and anybody you can imagine, man. I mean, like, if you look at his records, Ledoux ducked nobody, all right? Tough as nails guy. And for a guy like Spinks to go in with him at that young of a career, even as an Olympian, was pretty, it's pretty
Yeah.
impressive. Absolutely impressive. That's a pretty tough name to go in there. And that fight was a draw, you know what I mean? And even though it was a draw, like it was one of those fights that you just kind of like, all right, man, Spinks does have potential. He's still raw. He just, needs some seasoning and work. His very next fight, he fights Alfio Righetti, who was a part of that European block of heavyweights that started invading in the late 70s. So he's from Italy. So you had him and Lorenzo Zanon. And then you also had guys like Lucian Rodriguez, um, Alfredo Evangelista, who at that point was already a little ahead of the pack by fighting Ali, and a couple of others. But that was those middle and European fighters who they'd go in, they were tough contenders and had a round robin against each other, but anytime they stepped up against like top American counterpoints, they would usually get beat up pretty comprehensively, correct?
Yeah, I would say yeah, for sure. I mean, and a number of them were good, but we've talked about this before too, where it was like, holding, for instance, like the European heavyweight championship didn't mean you were the greatest, but it did mean something, and it usually meant like the current heavyweight champion would at least consider that fight or something. You know what I mean? And
Exactly.
nowadays, it's like whatever, who gives a shit for the most part. But a lot of also what kind of helped at least temporarily for Leon Spinks to help him financially, but also helped get him disciplined enough to, reach even that point was joining the Marines, which is, you kind of think Leon Spinks was a Marine. He was in the Marines for like 3 or 4 years, dude. Was
He didn't quit like Bo.
yeah, dude, he lasted far more than Riddick Bowe. But I don't know that he was really active or anything like that as a Marine throughout his life necessarily, but nonetheless, there's no question that that helped him. He was always kind of a knucklehead basically throughout his life, and there's a couple of pretty good books that go into far more detail about his life. But the fact that he was able to turn it all around, get disciplined enough, win a gold medal, and then turn pro, and actually, I mean, given everything we know about Leon now, like it's amazing that he didn't falter before then. It's amazing that he got to the heavyweight championship.
Yeah. And so he beats Righetti in 1977, and that was in November of 77. So now somehow this lands him a title fight with Muhammad Ali. And it's incredible to think about because if this happened today, people, I don't, there would be slight intrigue, but at the same time, everyone would be like denouncing and saying, what the fuck? And rightfully so. You know what I mean? Because like how this was clearly on Ali's end supposed to be a cherry pick. All right. By 1978, Muhammad Ali had gone through the gauntlet. Let's be face it. He should have retired a couple of years before that. Um, and going through the Thriller of Manila with Joe Frazier, having to survive 3 fights with Ken Norton, which in some ways was even tougher than what he had to deal with Frazier style wise. Um, Going through a guy like Jimmy Young, having to beat George Foreman to regain the belt, Ron Lyle, Ernie Shavers, the list goes on and on. And Ali had been through the ringer at this point. So by 1978, he was more or less spent. We all knew this. And he was just, taking fights where he can get like, the biggest cash outs, where he thought it would be safe money. And a guy like Leon Spinks, who was popular, gold medalist from the 76 Olympics, and because that Olympics was so popular that, it catapulted those guys pretty quickly themselves. Um, Simply enough, it was easy, when Ali, and also too, with Spinks able to beating Righetti, probably gave him, actually obviously got him ranked. So, Ali had an excuse to try to make that fight. And kind of like Tyson Fury, probably not to the extent because Ali never looked like fat shit like that. But Ali obviously didn't take Spinks as serious as he thought he should. So recipe for disaster.
Ali was clowning Leon the same as a lot of people were, and like, look at this fucking guy, like he's a ridiculous character and blah blah blah, and understandably because Leon was a character, but it just so happened that the stars aligned this
Yeah.
one time for him. They had, not only was it the right time in Muhammad Ali's career, he had his own health issues. He, like you said, had already gotten his ass kicked just endless times. And then Leon Spinks pulled it together, for
Yep.
just this one fight, pulled it together, and this was the fight to pull it together for.
Absolutely, and you gotta take into account too, Leon Spinks had George Benton in his corner for this fight. Originally, excuse me, Leon Spinks was trained by Sam Solomon. Excellent Philadelphia trainer, long time trainer who'd been around for decades and decades and, renowned in his own self. But Butch Lewis, who was worried about Spinks and knowing, his tendencies to run around and be wild and all that. And he felt that they needed an extra edge because this was a huge opportunity for him. And so Butch Lewis approached George Benton and asked him, he was like, "Yo, would you be willing to work with Leon Spinks for this fight?" He was like, "I think, with you being in the corner, that's gonna add more of a chance for us to win this whole thing." And Benton initially was like, a little like, "Hey man, he's trained by a couple of these guys and I don't want to interfere on that." But at the insistence of Butch Lewis, he finally was like, "You know what? Okay, I'll join in the corner. All good." So he does. And right away, Benton, gave Spence simple instructions. Like I think he joined them soon before the fight. It wasn't like he joined them all throughout camp and they were working on this long system. Like, Benton got with him and started explaining to him, "Listen, you're not gonna knock out Ali, so don't try to swing crazy and stuff like that. Just stay on top of him, keep on trying to outwork him. Ali's not gonna be able to outwork you. And anytime you keep on going, you turn it up even more. If he tries to lean back, bang at his body, don't try to get him at the head because you're not gonna hurt him or not you're not going to hurt him or knock him out and stuff like that. Bang at his arms, bang at everything else. By the time he starts bringing him down, then you start wailing at him. If he tries to fight you, fight the hell out of him. If he tries to do that, go with him. Like, don't let him try, don't get frazzled and just stay on top of him the entire time. Don't let him breathe. You know what I mean? As long as you're not trying to waste your own energy by trying to knock him out because you're not going to knock him out." And Spinks worked that to a T. Like Ali came in there, lackadaisical, and Spinks was an absolute tank that night. You know what I mean? And he kept up his stamina and everything, kept on throwing, kept on churning, kept on churning, kept on throwing, and Ali just couldn't keep up. And then in round 15, when Ali realized like, shit, I'm really like falling apart here, and like, I'm losing, I got to step it up and produce another Ali miracle. Um, Spinks, like George Benton, tell him if he tries to step it up and outfight you, outfight him. Just go in there. You're younger than him. You're stronger than him. And he did. In that last round, when you see Ali really starting to put it on him and Landis, trying to take it seriously, Spinks brings it up too. And it was a close fight, as close as that could be imagined. And Ali was one of those guys that had the stature, like anyone you'll see today in current days in boxing. If you have that type of stature, you got to do everything besides almost break a stool over his head to get a decision over a guy like that. It's not easy. And Spinks somehow pulled it off. Like it was 2 to 3 points on one card, 1 point on another card. Like it was really, really, really close, but Spinks was still able to pull that off. One of the most miraculous decisions in boxing history.
He followed he followed a good game plan, and
Mm-hmm.
that's exactly what he did. He outfought Ali, who by the way also gave a really good performance given everything he had been through, given his health, given everything, especially in retrospect that we know. He performed really well that evening too. Like, it was a great fight
Yeah, I don't
that
want to
year.
take anything like that. Like Spinks dominated him for the first 12 rounds, and Ali
No,
finally woke
no.
up. Like it
he,
was,
he had to fight to win that fight, and he did, and it was a better version than of Ali, even though he did obviously underestimate Spinks. It was a better version of Ali than I think a lot of people remember. And I mean, at least that evening, and that was also a lot of Ali's heart too. Like it wasn't like he was deteriorated for sure. But also another thing to kind of tack onto there was that dude, Leon was never big. He was never a big heavyweight. He was always like cruiserweight sized pretty much the whole time. And so,
yeah.
and Ali by that time, he was never a massive heavyweight himself, but he was firmly a heavyweight. So, that was just another kind of disadvantage that Leon had to overcome, which he did overcome just that one evening. But unfortunately, too, that one evening was the crowning achievement of his career, and although he did have a handful of decent wins after that, for the most part he just never regained anywhere near that form, and just kind of Leon took over.
Well, yeah, he was heavyweight champion for 7 months, and those 7 months were absolutely tumultuous for him. There was so much outside the ring activity going on, from him getting arrested for various instances,
there
domestic
Yeah, there
things,
are just so
abuse.
many. stories. There's so many stories. It's crazy.
And that's why he became a punchline for everybody. You know, the sketch with Richard Pryor, where he would talk about Leon, and he would try to talk about him kind of sympathetic, but he was clearly making fun of him too. Like he would say things like, "Oh, you know, man, I can't stand it when people come up and be asking me, be like, don't you think he's dumb?" And be like, "Nah, man, you know, Leon, he's all right. Like he goes over there, and then he'll start doing the jokes and be like, yeah, man, I ain't got no tifas, I ain't got no money, I ain't got no driver's license, freaky deaky." Like that was like the line that he used to use on him and things like that. And then he became a punchline for everyone else. And I mean, but Leon was falling into these traps because he was a dude who came from absolutely nothing, from the slums of St. Louis, Missouri, you know, from the slums of St. Louis, some of the most notorious projects over there, to becoming a suddenly heavyweight champion in the end of the, you know, a wild decade of the 70s, Studio 54 and all these other things going on around him, everything at your fingertips now, people throwing yourselves at you and all these people trying to take advantage of you as well. You know, it was just an absolute recipe
That's
for disaster.
it's I mean, just one of the best microcosms or one of the best like representations of what exactly who Leon was and what was going on is even when he was heavyweight champion and even after he had made, you know, a substantial amount of money and blown sponsorships and stuff like that because of the trouble he was getting into, he was still falling for like, with all due respect, like crackhead schemes and shit. He was still falling for like, you know, getting ripped off by hookers down the street type of shit, like constantly. And I mean, but that was Leon. I mean, that was the kind of stuff that he was never like a highfalutin high society dude like ever.
And it's sad because so like he was when he's champion, and that whole thing is a fiasco now. George Benton left him after the first fight, like initially, because Sam Solomon was definitely salty that Benton was there and he was his trainer. And like, you know, Benton was the one that came up mainly for the strategy and took most of the credit, I guess, by the press and stuff like that for what he did. And Benton mentioned the next morning when he went downstairs, he said there was a bunch of reporters there and he started answering questions. And Solomon came down there all icily and was like, no one's going to answer anything until Leon arrives, and then stared at Benton. And Benton's like, you know what? I don't need to deal with this. Like, you know, I helped him out that time. And he told Leon too. He was like, you're a good kid. He was like, good luck with whatever you're going to do. But he was like, I can't, you know, you got your own corner. So he left him. And, you know, all hell breaks loose. The rematch is coming up, and Leon's barely trained and he's not in shape. Ali's clearly motivated to become the first three-time heavyweight champion and all that stuff. Again, they run back to Benton like a week or two before the fight now. And they're like, please, can you come back? We need you, yada, yada, yada. Benton initially says no. And then he talked to Sam Solomon. Solomon was like, no, no, we actually do want you in camp. Please, we need your help. And Benton, you know, agrees. So he goes back in there, and come fight night, they said it was a clusterfuck. You know, I mean, Leon didn't have his cup. He didn't have something else was missing, like the whole the bucket was missing with water and ice and all that stuff. Like everything was missing. You know what I mean? They ended up borrowing Mike Rossman's cup, which was used from his fight with Galindez and some other shit that they had like borrow from other fighters.
Yeah, and if he was fighting Galindez, it was really used.
Absolutely. So think about that for a moment. And then Sam Solomon, in one of the most wildest things you can imagine, tells George Benton before they get into the ring, listen, all of us are going to take turns before a round to give Leon instructions. There was like four of them. He was like, I'll go in there and give him. Next guy's, and then he was like, Michael's going to go in there and give him instructions. Then you'll get to go in there and give him instructions. And Benton's like, the fuck does that even mean? He was like, so I just get to sit on the sidelines for 2 rounds and just watch while you guys try to say. He was like, what if I have to say something? Tell it to one of us when we relay it to Leon. And so Benton does that for like 2 rounds of himself. So that's like 6 rounds during the fight. Realizes this is all bullshit and helpless. And then he just walked out during the middle of the fight. He walked out, went back to the locker room, grabbed his bag and just left, went back to the hotel, didn't think anything of it. And that sums up Leon Spinks as a heavyweight champion, you know. And unfortunately, his career never recovered from that. You know, his very next fight, which was supposed to be the unofficial tournament to crown a new WBA heavyweight champion, he was crushed in 1 round by a then unknown Harry Coetzee. But then from there, it almost looked like he got himself together. Like it was now the start of 1980, and he actually had a few wins, exciting wins at that, that made it look like he might be starting to take some shit seriously. Like he knocked out that we just mentioned before. He knocked out Evangelista, what was an exciting fight. Beat Eddie Lopez, Kevin Isaac, and then he fights Bernardo Mercado, who we've talked about on the show before. Beat Ernie Shavers, monster puncher, but a guy who definitely
Yeah.
had
A low ceiling and just kind of
yeah,
never went beyond that.
but I mean a tough as nails dude. You know what I mean? An exciting fighter at that time. And on the undercard, I think those yeah, it was on the undercard of Ali Holmes. Spinks and Mercado went at it back and forth, absolute brawl. I think it's on Daily Motion if you want to watch it. I don't think it's on YouTube, but it's a fight that's worth checking out. And Spinks looked his ferocious best in that fight. I'm not even going to front. He looked really good in that fight. You know what I mean? And it looked like he was pulling himself together. Whatever it may be, it was looked like he was pulling himself together. So by the time he was going to get a fight with Larry Holmes in 1981 off of that win, um, people, I wasn't going to say that they thought he was going to beat Holmes, but it wasn't like an absolute mismatch where people thought Holmes would just curb stomp him in a second. Like it was an exciting fight. And Joe Louis had passed away, I think, soon before that. So it was like a tribute to Joe Louis. The fight was held in Detroit. And unfortunately for Spinks, Larry Holmes didn't like Leon Spinks for one reason or another. He didn't like him at all, he said, and took his aggressions out on him by leveling an absolute ass kicking on Spinks. Like
Yeah.
it was bad. It was one of those like out of all the heavyweight title defenses you'll watch of Larry Holmes, that's one of his most vicious ones where you can just clearly see he has like an agenda and just beats the daylights out of him for the 3 rounds that it lasts. You know,
Yeah.
um,
That was a great example of a excuse me, mean and pissed off Larry Holmes
yeah,
that was just not really interested in messing around because he had those other defenses where he's kind of like floating around, taking it easy and shit like that.
exactly.
This was not one of them.
No, I don't know what Spinks did to him either because Leon never really came across as a trash talker. He was just very happy-go-lucky and whatever.
If you
But
go look on YouTube, you'll find a slew of videos with that hyped up fucking memeified thumbnail where, he avenged Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali killed his kung fu man. There's fucking a bunch of like, and that's the story that a lot of people will tell you. Like, well, fucking Holmes was pissed off because he beat Muhammad Ali and Muhammad Ali was his hero. He beat Muhammad Ali. I
I'm to
mean,
say,
you know,
Ali beat Spinks after that, and he beat the hell out of Ali. What's he
they,
talking
they
about?
always say shit like, and then Mike Tyson knocked out Larry Holmes because he beat Muhammad, and there's always,
Yeah, the same narrative. I know.
regardless, he wasn't playing with Leon Spinks, bro. Larry Holmes was just coming in there and saying, "All right, man, night night."
No, it was bad, and Holmes was so pissed off after they tried to attack Jerry Cooney during the post fight. Poor
And
Howard Cosell
poor Jerry was just like chilling too. He didn't even do anything. He was like, "Hey, hey,
absolutely
good fight." Ah,
literally did nothing. I don't even think he said a word.
yeah, I don't
Like
even know. Yeah, he was just standing there on hand, waiting to get
Cosell,
interviewed, and
yes.
Larry just
Cosell
attacked
was
his
like, I'm gonna
ass.
bring in Jerry Cooney. Howard, you better not bring him in. You bring a Cooney over here, I'm gonna slap his face. I'm gonna slap him right now. And then he does. Next thing you know, there's Howard Cosell with a busted lip somehow. Like,
At least he didn't knock his toupee
yeah,
off.
yeah, right. That was left for Scott Ledoux to do. But but after that, unfortunately, Spinks's career hit the skids. It was never the same. And the 80s were rough for him. He dropped down to the cruiserweight division because the cruiserweight was new and the cruiserweight division was new. There wasn't a lot of big names there. And like you said before, Spinks wasn't a big guy. So he figured if he goes down to cruiserweight, it'd be an easy way to pick up a title. And if you look on the surface, you would think so, absolutely. But a guy like Spinks and how reckless he is and how undisciplined he was, especially during that point, it just didn't end up well. So by the time he fights the top cruiserweight in the division, which was Carlos De Leon at the time, who wasn't champion either, this is a non-title fight. De Leon beat the fucking shit out of him. De Leon was one of those guys that like he was a long-standing cruiserweight champ throughout most of the 80s, but he wasn't like an out, pound for pound level type guy or nothing like that. You know what I mean? He was just a really, really solid professional. A guy who was the head of the bulk for that time.
And
But like,
during a time when the cruiserweight division was just people didn't like that shit.
and I mean, like, I think De Leon is a little underrated today. in terms of like historical significance of the division. But yeah, it was a very weak division at that time. And a guy like Spinks with his pedigree probably was favored to, maybe clean it up if he was able to like take it seriously. But De Leon, man, that was a nasty one. Like he slashed Spinks up, he beat the shit out of him. Spinks was there, cut up in his mouth and everything. It was a nasty, nasty. That was a nasty loss
Yeah.
for him. And then he just pulls up, a bunch of like wins over pedestrian opponents and nothing like that. And then finally he fights Dwight Muhammad Cowie in '86 for a championship. Spinks at this point now had tried to go over to the Kronk in Detroit to try to get some discipline. And instead he suffered what on camera might be the single most humiliating ass kicking you'll ever see in a major fight. So
Well, and I mean, like it made sense because cruiserweight it was kind of up for grabs at that time.
still,
And the biggest problem, though, one of his biggest problems was that he was not staying active. So there was like 5, 6, 7, 8 months between some of those fights around that time, and a couple of them, like there was like a year or more. You can't do that with a guy like Leon, dude. He needed to stay in the ring, in the gym. You needed to keep him there and giving him any sort of leeway, giving him like an allowance or something. It's a bad idea, dude. Just don't. You can't. But unfortunately, that's what Leon did. Like he convinced a lot of these people who were handling him, and he went through a slew of managers and handlers. He convinced a lot of them to give him money, to give him front him money, allowances, etc. And that's exactly what wound up happening, and it showed in the ring. Unfortunately, Dwight Muhammad Kawi, that was a guy that, like, if you came in underprepared, if you came in not your best, if you weren't great at taking a punch, if you couldn't handle a dude clowning in your face while he's beating your ass, you're done. That's pretty much what happened.
and not only that, bro, like Cowie clearly had revenge on his mind. And we're not talking about, oh, the Ali revenge or whatever, but
The
like Cowie,
brotherly revenge, the actual kind.
absolutely. Cowie lost a lot of things in the unification fight, only a couple of years before that. And clearly he was still salty about that because it wasn't a very exciting fight. And Spinks fought very cautiously and was able to beat him. And since that time, Cowie, who always carried a major chip on his shoulder, wanted
Oh,
to take
everything.
everything, wanted to take it out on Spinks. And he did, man. Like if you watch that, it's like
He loved it.
he did
Every
because
minute of it.
that round where Spinks actually tries, like Cowie's hitting himself like that, and Spinks hits him with a hook, and then hits him with another one, and then like starts rallying a little bit, and Cowie drops his hands and just starts going like that, sticking his tongue out at him too. He's like, and then smiling with the giant mouthpiece. He's going like that. Go ahead, go to. He's slipping, slipping. Spinks is now missing every single punch, and Cowie is just like dancing around him. This little 5'7" stub, and just making him miss and slip like basically Cowie looked like one of those maze balls, you know what I mean? Where and he's going like that, and Spinks can't do nothing to him, and then Cowie moves in, jabbing him, and then just it was bad. It's bad. It's beyond bad.
And from that point forward, Spinks was just pretty much an opponent for the most part. Like he just never really came back from that. Like there were wins, but they were not against anybody, meaningful.
Yeah, and that was it. Like his career lasted much longer than it ever should have. He fought well into the '90s, and he definitely fell on hard times over the years. There was a lot of struggles that he had to go through. But one thing that he always maintained was a smile and his good personality. And I got to give that to him. Spinks, his career obviously is not Hall of Fame like and things like that, but that dude, he beat Muhammad Ali. How many people in life can ever say that? He became heavyweight champion to do that. He's an Olympic gold medalist. And he always remained popular up until his death. Like anytime anyone was able to see him in Canastota, he remained one of the most popular people there because he was real. All right. He didn't come off aloof or like demand, okay, get away from me. Like I don't want to do autographs or anything. You would see him around the grounds, and then you would see him at Graziano's in the same corner of the bar that he would always be with his wife and just hold court for the whole night with everyone just hanging around him. Like just a
Life of
beautiful.
the party shit, like he always was.
He really, really was, man. He just, and even if you couldn't understand what the fuck he was saying sometimes, because you couldn't, he'd just be like mumbling and garbling and all that. But like if you knew him, you got it. And It was just cool. Like when I the first time I saw him, I saw the first time I became aware of Leon Spinks was from that Muhammad Ali video, The Boxing's Best from HBO. And watching that as a kid, never did I think that I end up becoming buddies with this guy and legit friends. Like I'm not talking about this saying, "Oh yeah, I met him a few times. Leon was my friend." No, I knew him. My dad knew him. All right, like my mom and his wife were really close. Anytime we all saw each other, we all gave each other big hugs. Like we just Leon was almost like a family member to me by the end. Like I love that dude, man. I'll always have fond memories of Leon Spinks. Like just a great human.
I wish I would have gotten to know him, but you described everything you describe is everything everybody describes. That nobody he might have done some shit in his time, but nobody ever thought he had like a mean bone in his body. Not like that.
He really
Like
did it.
he was
He
he
was,
was a rascal. There,
yeah,
that's the word. He was a rascal.
absolutely.
Lovable rascal.
He would see my dad and then pretend that he want to take full. Oh, you in that camera again? And then he would smile and give him a hug, right? Like same shit. Like he was just. uh and last thing I'll say about it, like when I got to see his wife at the Hall of Fame post COVID, it was the first one get together after that, and Leon had since passed away. Like she was there, she was just there. That was our first year without him, and I think she was just trying to like see people and try to get a taste of what it was like, remembering how it was with her husband. And like when I saw her and we gave each other an embrace and like we talked for a bit, you just saw how much she loved him. You know what I mean? They were just a beautiful couple. If you got a chance to meet them, you would know. So, but the next who else would you got?
Definitely unique, without a
Yeah,
question. And his story, to the path to the heavyweight title, unique too. But also a very unique opportunity fighting for the heavyweight championship in your professional debut. That's got to be brought up too. It has to be. We've talked about him too. Yeah, we've talked about both of Leon Spinks and Pete Rademacher in on different episodes, but whatever, it's fine. We can go over that shit again because why not? But I mean, this was also kind of this coincides this story with what we had done a few months ago with the kind of lost 1950s heavyweights. A lot largely because of Floyd Patterson, Customato, and their foothold over the heavyweight division, and a number of fighters who probably should have gotten heavy shots at the heavyweight championship or should have gotten them sooner. Um, and there was a lot of criticism when Customato and Floyd Patterson chose to go ahead and grant Pete Rademacher a fucking shot at the heavyweight championship in his professional debut. And was this his first defense or second defense? Now I'm gonna have to look it up, but I know it was really early in his championship reign.
it was his first
Second,
defense. It was second. No, second. Yeah, yeah, second.
second, yeah, because Tommy Jackson was the first, and that was kind of like a simmering feud or whatever that they
Yeah,
were trying.
yeah. Imagine those first two title defenses, a completely washed Tommy Jackson, who you already beat up at one point, and then Rademacher. If
Yeah,
that's not a
and
custom model special, I don't know what is.
the Tommy Jackson fight was ostensibly or supposedly because there was some sort of, bad blood there, unfinished business or whatever from the first fight. Not really. But regardless, that's how they sold it. And then the very next fight, 1956 Olympic heavyweight gold medalist Pete Rademacher. But I mean, to be fair, there's a little bit more to the story than is usually remembered because obviously, it didn't go well for him, but because he was not heavyweight champion. But he actually had a lot of amateur experience and was like a highly decorated amateur, not just an Olympic gold medalist. He was like a United States amateur champion. He was a Chicago Golden Gloves champion. He'd boxed for the Army, ROTC, all this sorts of stuff. And I mean, he was very experienced. So I mean, it's not like it was his first fight ever, but still, you still got to go by the rules. His professional debut. Um, but I mean, for a moment there, looked like looked like he might be heavyweight champion. Oh, and actually, I'm sorry. One part of it too that I forgot to mention was I actually didn't know this just because I'd never really read up on it, I guess. But apparently, one of the big reasons why Customato chose Pete Rademacher not only because he was an Olympic heavyweight gold medalist, but because he was able to come up with the $250,000 fee to secure the fight. And that's what Pete Rademacher later said, that like he'd gotten some people together to front the money to get the fight, basically, and almost made good on that shit.
You know, um, longtime friend of the show and person who's been on it before, Lee Groves. I believe one of his first articles that he wrote for Ring Magazine back in the late '80s when Steve Farhood gave him a shot was on Pete Rademacher. I think it was the article where like he interviewed him. It was kind of like a catch up of how he was doing and all that. And it was a very interesting article. And Rademacher was definitely he was a businessman besides a fighter. Like he was a guy that just had a very smart idea and acumen and all that. And that's how he was able, like you said, to finagle himself to get a title shot in his first professional fight. This wouldn't be like no run of the mill pig, like pug, being able to do something like this. Like Leon Spinks wouldn't have been able to finagle himself to get a title fight in his first professional fight like that.
And
Um,
that's another thing, was apparently Rademacher was like a great talker, was that he was
yeah,
like super charismatic.
absolutely. And I'm sure everyone that he explained this to and what was going on and
And I would
considering
hope so too, because that fool looked like he was like 59 by the time he was 28. I'm just saying, fools aged differently back then, bro.
it's true, bro. He looked like he had that Chuck Davy look, you know what I mean? Where
Yeah, he looked like Ingmar Johansson, but like old Ingmar Johansson when he was young.
I guarantee you for the 1950s, he was probably a dreamboat for all the women out there, right? Man in the flame.
Straight up. It's like a mature cowboy or some
Yeah,
shit.
yeah. In that era, I'm sure they were just going all gaga over him for those Bobby Soxers, right? So
I mean, I'm over here a gray beard motherfucker at like 42, so I'm not, I'm not talking too much shit, but I'm just saying.
I'm gonna be 40 this year, and I'm still looking nice and young, man. Let's try to keep this up.
Yeah, I'm
But
looking like Orson Welles and shit, so I'm not even trying to.
it's true though, man. Everyone in the 50s back then, bro, just aged differently. Whatever. But
They did. Straight up.
you look at a photo of Chuck Davy, who was a tough welterweight from that era, bro. Like you would not think that man was in his 20s. He looked like he was in the late 40s, early 50s, with that line hairline, the way he had it all the way back, scrawny look, the patchy like chest hair, the whole thing. I mean, like, he looked kind of youthful in the face, but other than that, like you would just
Those
kind of be
fools
like,
lived some lives by the time they hit like 25, dude.
it's very true. So, anyways, yeah, Rademacher was able to, finesse himself into a shot. And as he did that, a guy like Customato, who we've talked about before on the show, was always rallying against, mobsters and different forces and beings or whatever that was like trying to ruin boxing and all that. But he did that under the pretense of knowing that he was protecting Floyd Patterson among anything else from
I
any
mean,
type of contender who could actually, was like living
getting
in.
250 grand for this. He had his own racket going. You know what I'm saying? Who
Yeah.
needs fucking mobsters?
So that was the main thing is that like Patterson remains the only heavyweight champion in history, probably in that era. I mean, like, there's been guys like Charles Martin, I guess, who've gained more respect since being champion for their performances. But like, Patterson is one of the few, Hall of Famers, that's how I'll put it, as a Hall of Famer who is more respected for his fights not being champion than when he was.
Yep, that's true. He had some really good wins and a number of fights that he should have won and just barely lost or whatever later on in his career. And fights where like, if he had shown that kind of I don't want to say flair, but if he'd shown that kind of grit and that kind of heart and been that willing to take on tough opposition as champion, first of all, he probably wouldn't have been fucking champion as long.
Yeah, true.
But still, it would have
But
been
I always get the
respectable.
sense that he would have been. That was more of a custom model thing than it was a Patterson outright ducking anybody.
No, yeah, I agree.
Especially.
He didn't seem to like it after a while either. He didn't seem to like that he was kind of getting,
I mean,
poked at.
Patterson was a sensitive guy. You think about that. This is a guy that anytime he lost, especially when he lost the heavyweight championship to Johansson, and then when he lost to the Liston, he went back and then put on a disguise to
Yeah,
like,
fucking he had a beard or a wig or
yeah,
something.
and yeah, put on like a thing in
and
the
and
dresses,
copped to it. So
so
this isn't some story. He was like, "Oh yeah, no, I snuck out with a
yes,
disguise." Like,
absolutely, because that's how sensitive he was. So you mean to tell me reading everything he was in the papers about, oh, he's fighting, Cut and Shoot Harris or Tom McNeely or this one or that one or goddamn Pete Rademacher making his pro
probably
debut.
got to him.
Absolutely, why isn't he fighting Zora Foley? Why isn't he fighting Eddie Machin? Why isn't he fighting Cleveland
Yeah,
Williams?
Nino
One or that one,
Valdez, etc. Yeah,
Valdez, yeah, Sonny Liston. Like, where are these guys? And so the thing is, there
fighting
was
each other.
Absolutely. So Rademacher, before the fight, he most famously said that if he beat Patterson, that he was going to retire immediately, right? And so that,
Imagine the mess that would have caused.
oh my God, man. I mean, if the 50s weren't any, if the mid 50s heavyweight division wasn't already as muddled as it was after Marciano's retirement and the way things went about, I can't even imagine what the fuck would happen. I Liston might have still been even more shut out when you think about it. Because if it
Maybe,
was on
yeah.
to like a vacant title, who's gonna back Liston and be like, yeah, yeah, he needs to fight for the vacant championship. Patterson might have got it again against I don't know who, but anyways, none of that happened. The first round and a half, it looked like it could have happened. Rademacher came out there guns a blazing and was boxing really well, and he even dropped Patterson like most people did. And then from there, ended up being one of the most one-sided ass kickings you'd find in a heavyweight fight, like as most people anticipated.
Yeah, then he looked like he was only like Pete Rademacher, he was 27 or something like that when he won the gold medal. So like he was not a young, nowadays you think about if there's a fighter who's winning the gold medal or whatever in the Olympics, they're usually like 17, 18, maybe 19 or 20 or something at like, the most. And the dude was like 27 or 28. So like he was not a young guy, at least in boxing years when he won it in the first place. But then like, he just kind of he didn't look young after the first round or two anyway. Like he just started getting his ass kicked and looking like an absolute fucking yeah, it didn't look good, dude. And he kind of made Floyd Patterson look good. Like you said, Floyd Patterson was dropped by damn near everybody. Usually got up to win, but like, yeah, I mean, it's tough to also similar to when Tyson Fury took on Francis Ngannou. It's similar. Or, I'm sorry, it's difficult to spin that situation where you're like, oh, well, I got up, I kicked his ass. You shouldn't have gone down in the first place, dude. Pete Rademacher shouldn't have been knocking you down. And, it shouldn't have taken you six, seven, whatever knockdowns to get his ass out of there, but it did. But also, I guess the final point on that too is back to this whole size thing. Floyd Patterson was not a big heavyweight. Dude was like a middleweight fighting as a heavyweight, basically.
Absolutely. If Patterson was fighting today, he'd probably max out around 175 and maybe like make it to cruiserweight. But there's no way he'd be a heavyweight. Not a chance.
With his leaping and style.
Well, how did Don Dumphy explain it when he was watching it? He said something about when he was watching Patterson, and then they were it was one of those fights that Larry Merchant mentioned. He was like, oh, he's kind of fighting similar to how Floyd Patterson used to fight. He was like, oh yeah, that's right, Floyd Patterson, because Dumphy commentated all the fights over there. He was like, but he wasn't jumping in like a leaping gazelle like Patterson did.
Yeah, because they called that hook the gazelle punch. For
Yeah.
what I don't know who started that, but they started referring to that leaping hook of his as a gazelle punch.
But
Kind of makes sense.
Rademacher, after that fight, he said that if he had beaten Patterson, he would retire, but that wasn't the case. And he ended up having a career after that. Like his very next fight, he fights Zora Foley, the aforementioned Zora Foley, who was deserving of a title shot from about most of the 50s, mid 50s, that is. And it was like he got stopped in that fight. It happens, what I mean? Foley was a competent professional who wasn't going to be awed by a former Olympian and just went about his business, whether he lost a close fight or won, whatever it was, he was probably going to beat the daylights out of you. And that's what he did. And then Rademacher, for that point, became one of those heavyweights where he'd pull up a string of wins. Like his record when he retired was 15-7. So I'm not going to be like he had a long career after that. He didn't. But anytime he stepped up against a notable opponent, he lost, and he lost pretty comprehensively. Like he got stopped by Zora Foley. Doug Jones knocked him out. Um, Archie Moore ended up stopping him and chopping him up, and Carl Mildenberger also beat him as well. So you have those losses, and his most notable win was against a completely washed Bobo Olson,
Yeah,
who some
yeah, like a very washed Bobo Olson toward the end of
who
his
was still
career.
like lingering around at that point, and that's it. But I mean, Rademacher, even though his career ended, like his professional career was kind of ho hum and everything like that. he'll always be in the record books and always be remembered as being the only professional in history to challenge for the heavyweight championship in his pro debut. Well, I mean, unless you want to count Fury and Ngannou, even though that was a non-title fight, that was for the lineal championship. So
Well, and we talked about that when it happened too. And I
yeah,
mean, like we've talked about it since. And I mean, in my opinion, and maybe people will disagree, dude, but if Francis Ngannou would have knocked Tyson Fury out, I don't see how you don't count that as a legit like he won. He defeated the heavyweight champion. I know like it was limited or the rounds were I understand that. I'm not dumb, but I mean, so what? I mean, what do you're gonna now Tyson Fury would then turn around and say like that didn't happen? Just pretend that didn't happen, that I didn't just get fucking knocked to shit. We've seen this in movie scenarios. It doesn't work. They'd have to have a return. So in any case, yeah, I mean it's Pete Rademacher, dude. He came very close to seizing the heavyweight championship in his professional debut. Obviously, did not amount to a top heavyweight over the course of his career, but nonetheless, dude, that's pretty wild that he wound up even getting that opportunity. Some might say that Floyd Patterson kind of took a quick-ish road to the top, but I guess in those days it probably would have been closer to average, about 4 years or so into his professional career, 30, 31 fights. That's not that, that's not that fast, especially not comparatively.
nah, and like Patterson was like built up. I wouldn't say he was carefully maneuvered and stuff like that. He fought some decent guys, but one of his biggest names on his record back then was Joey Maxim, which was a fight
Hmm.
that he actually lost. You know,
Yep.
so
Which understandable. Maxim was a seasoned vet and whatnot and very skilled,
seasoned
but
vet
I
is put
mean,
it nicely too, man. Maxim was a veteran of way over 100 fights at that point, and I think Patterson was like still less than 20.
yeah, it was like his like 15th fight or something like that. That was a
And
that was
even at that
that
point,
was
I
a bad
think
mistake.
yeah, and even at that point, I think it still might have been like a really close fight. So
Yeah, and
Patterson,
he was middleweight sized dude. He was just not Patterson, that is. He was not very big at the time. So that was a mistake.
sure. I mean, for that sake too, we can mention like Mike Tyson, for instance, right? Mike
Hmm.
Tyson was fast tracked, but at the same time, they stacked a lot of fights in that 1 year before he was able to challenge for the title.
Oh yeah, for sure. And there was so much anticipation too. Like, and obviously you and I weren't around to know that at the time, but you could see it looking in newspapers and magazines, even at the time, that were covering Mike Tyson before he turned pro or mentioning him before he even turned pro. People knew about this kid up in Catskill and up in upstate New York that was uh, blowing way larger fighters out of the water very quickly, winning championships, setting like a knockout record in some tournament, etc. And so a lot of people already knew about Mike Tyson. But that's a big reason why he got fast tracked. Because I mean, dude, the guy was like fucking by the time he was like 14 years old, he's like grown man sized. So I mean, like, what time were they gonna waste? He didn't need to grow into his body anymore or anything like that. By the time he turned pro, he looked, like those highlight reels they've been showing on social media or ESPN Classic, however fucking long. That's how Mike Tyson looked pretty much from the beginning. So there was no time to waste. But yeah, you're right. They did throw a bunch of fights at him in a pretty condensed period of time, which is something that just wouldn't really happen these days. And this is one thing where I agree with Teddy Atlas. One of the few instances I'll agree with Teddy Atlas where he says fighters should be fighting off TV. They should be, you should be getting these fighters away from TV deals and stuff like that so they can develop. And that's what Mike Tyson did.
He absolutely did, and they were brilliant with the way they built him up too. The matchmaking was really well because, like, sure, the guys weren't world beaters, or some of them were just downright horrible, but each of them, they gradually each fight he was getting like more experience with guys, even if the records weren't great. Like there were spoilers; it's supposed to go rounds, and Tyson was just blasting them. A couple of them were able to last maybe 3 or 4 rounds, but that was it. No one was going 5 rounds with Tyson. No one was going 6 rounds with him until like Jesse Ferguson. Like, Tyson was just absolutely bludgeoning these fighters. And what the brilliant thing about it too is, like you said, some of them were featured on ESPN and a couple of other networks or whatever, but a lot of the off TV ones, which would happen on like those upstate New York shows, they were smart in the sense that Tyson would fight early enough at that night that they'd be able to get the highlights and send it to the newscast that night, so they'll be able to show the highlights of Tyson just exploding some guy's melon open on like the 10 o'clock
Yeah.
news that and people were just like, okay, you're watching the news. Oh, this is what's going on in upstate New York. Well, another homicide occurred at the Rosemount Inn where Mike Tyson went in there and knocked out John Alderson. Then you see this guy, and you're
Which
just
is
like, what in the
yeah,
hell?
this little dude who was like 18, 19, or whatever he was, and just like smashing some fucking much larger dude. And there was still this kind of undercurrent or rumor or whatever where people were like, you just need to clinch him. Like, come on, like this is bullshit.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, just come on, you just jab him and clinch him and you could beat him. And so then they started putting him in with like these larger, gradually larger and larger fighters who were trying to clinch him, and they were just getting fucking blasted across the ring, and that's very effective marketing.
It's true. Like, for instance, when they started matching him up, the first test that he was supposed to have, test I say in quotes, was supposed to be against a guy named Donnie Long. And Donnie Long was, again, no, it was a heavyweight that, like, if you see his record, he had fought James Broad and he fought John Tate and he lost to both of them, but he went the decision. He went the distance with both of them. And they were competitive fights. And he had a couple of other names on his record. Like, he was, out of all the Tyson opponents at that point, he was a guy that was looked upon as maybe a prospect or someone to be, keep an eye on. And in a magazine I have, I think it's near me somewhere, like one of those Tyson specials that Ring Magazine put out back in the 90s. They did a chronological order of his opponents, and the pre-fight talk on that one was that a lot of people were doubting Tyson's ability to handle a guy like Long at that point, where even Teddy Brenner secretly picked Long because I think this fight was a top rank show. Teddy Brenner, who never was never really that high on Tyson apparently, thought that Long was going to beat him. And Tyson went out there and blasted Donnie Long in what was like 45 seconds, whatever the fuck it was, just killed him. And then the only time then from after that point where you saw Tyson actually like start struggling wasn't until like when he was seasoned fighting guys like Quick Tillis. That's when, these dudes learned how to like go in there, survive. And even then, like they were motivated trying to derail a hot young prospect like Tyson, like a dude like Tillis, who had been through it a lot of times and had an up and down career, and people have already written him off. Knew that if he was able to derail a guy like Tyson, it would be able to jet rocket his career again. And he came in that fight motivated, and he gave Tyson fits. And but by the time Tyson went up to fight Trevor Berbick in the middle of '86, I mean, let's think about it. He turned pro in '85. He's fighting for the heavyweight championship a little over a year later. And
Yeah, dude, he was I mean, I would say that that's pretty fast. Like, I know they
it,
squeezed a lot of
like
fights in, but that's pretty fucking
that's a
fast.
fast track to go for a title in a year and a half of turning pro. So turns pro. The anniversary was yesterday, right? His pro
Yeah,
debut. Yeah, so
Hector
that's
Mercedes, yeah.
and he wins the title in November of '86 against Trevor Berbick, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, it's almost like that's like a year and a half, a little over a year and a half.
I mean, that's pretty fucking crazy, dude. Like, and again, that's not really something that we would be likely to see again. At
Huh?
least not quite that way?
Absolutely not. Well, speaking of the fast tracks and stuff like that, you have to mention one of Mike Tyson's victims on the way to the title, that being Marvis Frazier.
That's true. That's a pretty good and I think that you'll see a common thread for a lot of these fighters that we're mentioning too is that there's some sort of lofty amateur accomplishment with almost all of them.
Mhm.
And I want to bring up at least one more in a minute that will not apply to, but nonetheless, Marvis Frazier, we've talked about him a whole bunch of times off the show just because 80s heavyweight, but and also obviously son of Joe Frazier, who himself could probably figure into this conversation a little bit. But like a lot of these guys also had Golden Gloves championships under their belt, like Marvis Frazier did. Marvis Frazier was a highly touted amateur prospect, was somebody who was known around the gyms as a skilled fighter, a really good boxer puncher, and somebody who was like, they were kind of just waiting for him to turn pro because he definitely had a slightly more pro style, although he did have good style. he and good skill. He was the kind of fighter that was, perhaps a little bit better for suited for the pros. And unfortunately, his dad got into management.
Marvis Frazier was the number one ranked heavyweight in the amateurs in the late 70s, going into 1980 for the 1980 Olympic Games. That's an incredible accomplishment in itself. We've talked about countless times on the show how deep the competition was as the amateur boxing in the 70s, going into the 80s. Um, Again, you had the 76 team that was extremely popular. You had the guys that almost made the 76 team that were trying to make 1980. You had a whole crop of new fighters now that were inspired off the 76 team trying to make the 1980 team. Like it was a deep, deep era. And Marvis Frazier had to contend with guys like Tony Tubbs and Tim Witherspoon and Greg Page and Michael Dokes and a host of other heavyweights, amateurs out there that, all tried scrambling for the number one spot. And Frazier, to his credit, was able to amass like a ridiculous record of like 50 something and 0 before he lost his first fight, which was Tony Tubbs. And because Tubbs was an outstanding amateur, you know what I mean? Like all those guys were just like right there. But Frazier was that dude, you know what I mean? Like he trained out of his dad's gym, but he was trained mostly by Georgie Benton. Because George Benton at the time was one of the house trainers at Frazier's gym. And that's a tremendous asset to have. Benton has gone obviously went on to become one of the greatest trainers and minds in boxing history, respected by all. And back then, when he was training Marvis, he had Marvis as like a beautiful boxer, complete opposite as what you would see of him as a pro, which was the bobbing and weaving Frazier style.
And
And
George Benton was a middleweight, right? Philadelphia middleweight.
he was a
Yeah.
middleweight. Yeah. So Benton started training fighters after he got shot. His career ended in the early 70s, around 1970 or something like that, 71. He got shot in the back over a dispute because some guy was trying to hit on his sister, and one of Benton's brothers beat the guy up. And the guy went looking for revenge and just happened to see George, and it didn't matter which Benton he got as long as he got a Benton. So shot George Benton in the back. Benton's career is over. He turns to training, and Frazier was like helping him, stuff like that. Frazier was the one that kind of gave him like his start. Him and Futch kind of like, I start working with fighters here. Can you help out with this? Can you help out with that? And Benton was like kind of like leaning in the streets a little bit, starting to run numbers, but then he started like doing the boxing stuff because he was like, all right, this is, much better. And started working with Marvis. Marvis started training seriously in the mid 70s, especially after like Thrilla in Manila. He was already starting to be in training, and career took off from there. And like I said, he built it all the way up until the finals of the Olympic trials where he fought James Broad, who was the other top amateur at that time. And Frazier shockingly was knocked out in the first round. Um, Apparently so viciously that it caused like some kind of damage in his neck. Like he suffered some kind of neck injury. And talk
James
about
Broad Axe.
yeah, that's another sad tale to be told on this show one day. A very very sad tale, in fact. But Broad, who was much bigger than Frazier was, um, spiked
Yeah,
him
he's a large
basically,
fellow.
as they called him Broadaxe, and then later on, some people being slick would call him Broadass. That's his nickname. But he basically spiked Frazier. Like it was a pretty nasty knockout by all accounts. And Frazier suffered neck damage, I think nerve damage, and ended up getting surgery for it. And you see like if you see like photos of him or video from that time, you'll see like a scar like on the back of his neck a little bit, right? So he turns pro, and kind of like how David Reed had the droopy eyelid, and so he already had a slight handicap. For whatever reason, his management felt that they needed to rush him a little bit. That's what they've always said. I mean, I'm sure that might be underlying factors in there too. A Frazier just feeling some sort of pride or something. But when the time Marvis turned pro, Joe started really taking over hands on and everything. He was already his manager and really doing that, but he started being more hands on with the training and putting Benton in the background. And while he started taking over it, and subsequently started molding for Marvis' style. Like I said, Marvis was more of a boxer puncher as an amateur, and he was an aggressive dude. You know what I mean? Like clearly he had his dad's hook and like mannerisms, but like he was more of a boxer mold, and he was built like that. He wasn't built like Joe Frazier. Built Joe Frazier was built to be a brawler and to get in there and duck and be on your chest and
Yeah,
that type of
that's one
thing.
of the more underrated aspects of Joe Frazier is how fucking thick that fool was, dude. Just look
Yes,
at photos. His legs are like fucking tree trunks, and
and he
Marvis
wasn't
wasn't
a
quite
tall
built
guy
like that.
either. Yeah, he wasn't built like that. Top Marvis was built more taller and lankier. He was built to be a boxer. He wasn't built to be a Joe Frazier like clone. And Frazier started doing it, and then like when people questioned him too, Frazier's like, "Oh, well, when you get in there, that boxing stuff can only work for so long. You got to get in there and dig. You know what I mean? Get on him and breathe on him.
You got to
Hit him
come
with
out
that."
smoking.
Yeah, yeah. And before you know it, that's how Marvis started fighting. And his career, like I said, it was fast track quick. His first fight is on YouTube. I sent it to you the other day. He fought this guy named Roger Troop, who was a former NFL player and a tough guy. He ended up having a horrible record at the end of it, but he was a tough fighter. If you watch this fight, you can see that he knew what he was doing in that. And round one, Frazier goes out there fighting just like his dad, ducking in there, swinging, but he's so small. Like his body frame is small. He looks like a cruiserweight. He doesn't look like a heavyweight. He's just a guy and you can just see he's fighting like his dad, but it's like a smaller, lighter version that just it almost feels like them punches can't hurt you. And
It
he's
doesn't
winging
look as
and he's swinging.
natural. Yeah.
It doesn't look as natural, exactly. Like he's forcing it almost. And near the end of that first round, Troop hits him with a right hand that had Frazier skidding across the ring and almost out of the ring. If this happened during this era, that would be automatically declared a knockdown because it was a knockdown. Only the ropes held him up. Otherwise, Frazier would have been in the fifth row. And then next round, he comes out boxing like he did in the amateurs, on his toes, jabbing, right hand. Ends up dropping Troop and looking beautiful at that point. You know what I mean? And then he started reverting in between, but he gets through that first pro fight. You know what I mean? He gets through it. He's very exciting, and people are hyped about him. Before you know it, he's already in there fighting, future Mike Tyson opponent Steve Zowski. And by the time he, so 1981 rolls around, he fights Guy Casal, who was like a meathead heavyweight from that back era. And one like Casal was one of those guys that like another one that you could explain. Like he wasn't a fringe contender. He wasn't really a contender. His biggest win was against a fighter by the name of Bobby Halpern, I want to say, who was a fighter. He's Steve shaking the head. You know what I'm talking about. Bobby Halpern was a 50s heavyweight who retired, tried making a comeback in the 70s, ended up getting shot up in some kind of liquor store like robbery or something crazy, like badly, to a point that no one could understand how he survived that shit. I certainly couldn't. And I mean, pretty remarkable story in itself. But Casal flattened him at MSG, and Bobby Halpern was like really old, so that brought into question a lot of controversy. That's what he was mostly known for. But anyways, he was beating up guys like that. So by the time he moves up now in 1983, he's fighting. Now he's fighting James Broad in a rematch of undefeated guys when Broad beat him in the first time. He beats Broad there, and then he fights Joe Bugner. Joe Bugner, surprisingly, when people look at him, you're like, how the hell was he still around in the 80s? You got to remember, Joe Bugner turned pro when he was a teenager. Like, he was young as shit when he turned pro. He was like 17, 18. You know what I mean? And so he was still relatively young in the mid 80s. Like, he had a very long career, but he was only like in his mid 30s. Like, he wasn't that old. You know what I mean? Which is crazy.
And and dude was fighting for respect like his entire career because he beat the fucking uh
Henry Cooper.
yeah, Henry Cooper, and people were like, fuck that guy because he beat Henry Cooper.
And by all accounts, that was a really close fight where they felt Harry Gibbs, the referee for that, like totally robbed Cooper.
Yeah,
And
which made it even worse.
Cooper didn't talk to him for decades, like the referee that was all this stuff. Like it was bad.
Yeah, speaking of characters, both of them, Cooper and Bugner.
Absolutely. But Bugner at that point, like, he had over a 60 fight career, but like I said, he was still young and fresh. Not young, but he was still like fresh enough that he would be able to put on a good performance. And that was good experience for him. And I'm sure Joe was like, yeah, I fought Joe twice. Get in there, go smoking. You can't handle it on the inside. Who knows?
Yeah.
But all that led, and this is why we say fast tracked, to a fight with Larry Holmes.
Well, the only other kind of missing elements there was that the loss to James Broad, which you mentioned happened in the Olympic trials for 1980, which we didn't wind up going to because we wound up having to boycott, which also affected some of the rest of Joe Frazier's stable, because the three fighters that Joe Frazier signed and like his, like to debut his managerial or promotional stable or whatever, Marvis Frazier, James Schuler, and I believe Rodney Frazier, if I'm not mistaken. And
Yeah, it was
so it was like, James Schuler was supposed to have gone to the Olympics. And James Schuler, his nickname Black Gold, because everybody expected him, like he was like a shoe-in to win gold medal. And so James didn't wind up going to the Olympics for obvious reasons. And then Marvis Frazier lost his chance to even, go to the Olympics, which they didn't go to anyway. But in either case. And then in 1982, almost the entire year, Marvis Frazier caught viral hepatitis and was out pretty much the entire year, and so lost that year, which made him even more fast tracked when he came back. And
yeah, I didn't know
so,
that. I didn't know he had hepatitis.
yeah,
Interesting.
he was scheduled to face Jimmy Clark, and they canceled the fight because he got hepatitis, and he wound up sitting out almost the entire year, or I think the entire year. But so yeah, that I think that made it even more pressing. Like they were like, all right, like let's get back in there. And so they got a shot at Larry Holmes, who was, Larry Holmes was another, just another instance where Larry was not wasting any time and was mad that anybody could ever consider that this little puny guy could potentially beat him or something, And Larry just took it personal, dude. Larry was not fucking around. And so unfortunately, Marvis Frazier caught the brunt of that.
And the way that fight came about too is kind of ridiculous. Like Holmes, it's 1983. Holmes has been champion since '78, and he's still griping about not getting respect and all that. He beat Cooney by
Super
this point.
bitter. Yeah.
Always bitter, yeah. And he's still WBC champion, but he has contenders on his ass that he doesn't really particularly care to fight because why not? You know what I mean? He just doesn't feel like doing it. And the main one was Greg Page. So we've mentioned Greg Page in the past and all this other stuff, but like Page, yes, he could be sloppy, he could be lazy, he could not give a shit and just put in the absolute fucking ass of a performance. But I will say this. By 1983, Greg Page was motivated for Larry Holmes. Like, he wanted to fight him. He wanted to fight him more than anything.
Former
And
Golden Gloves champion himself.
yeah. And when Page was motivated, and he was putting on a pretty, he was putting on a string of good performances too at that point, right? This wasn't like where he completely fell apart and by the mid 80s and just, whatever. Like Page was still credible. And this was like a fight that he was the number one contender. Holmes realized that this was going to be a difficult fight for him. Like it wasn't going to be easy. And the fight with Marvis Frazier comes up too. And he's like, well, I'll take the Marvis Frazier fight and I'll take the money with that. And the WBC, surprisingly to their credit, was like, no, you can't fight Frazier. He's not ranked. Like, you need to fight Page. And Holmes is like, well, fuck you. I don't care. I'll just vacate then, which he does. And so the WBC was like, no, he vacated afterwards because the WBC was like, okay, if Frazier wins the fight, he's not going to win the title. The title's just going to be left vacant. So Holmes ends up fighting Frazier, and then afterwards, subsequently, IBF comes around, and Holmes accepts their invitation to become their champion, which obviously gives the IBF a lot of credibility and jumpstarts their career. But that fight, Frazier comes in wearing the same trunks. I don't know if they were the exact ones that his dad wore for when he fought Ali in the Garden that time, but he wore the same exact, like the same style trunks, the same color, the same scheme, right? Wears that in there and trying to fight like Joe, doing the whole all that, right? But he's so much smaller than Holmes. Like he just doesn't look like he belongs in there. Holmes wasn't the biggest heavyweight either. Like there were dudes bigger than him, but Holmes was a stocky guy who looked like he belonged to heavyweight. Like he was tall and he was thick and he just had the body frame of what looked like a heavyweight of that time. You know, Frazier didn't. Frazier just looked so thin.
There's got to be a reason to bob and weave. Like you got to do something on the end of it. If you're fighting a much bigger guy and just getting lower, it's not doing you any good.
He was just so hyperactive about it for whatever reason. He was just so hyper and like I get it, it's the nerves of fighting goddamn Larry Holmes and everything, but he was just he had I don't even want to know if you want to call it success, but he made Holmes miss a couple of times early on, and that started giving him some confidence. And then
Which
like
only pissed Holmes off more.
exactly because like Holmes is just measuring him. He knows what he's doing. Like he's just taking his time, and Frazier now is starting to like you know he threw a couple of flurries, which maybe like one punch or so landed on Holmes, but like he's standing there and then he drops his hands. And then he starts like ducking his head over there like he's gonna slip everything, thinking that like he's gonna, make Holmes look stupid. And Holmes is the one, that's that again. The Damon Wayans from Great White Hype. You trying to make me look stupid on national TV? Holmes looks over, measures them. Frazier sticks his chin out. Holmes cracks him with the right hand. Beautiful straight right hand. Holmes is always known for that jab, but Holmes had a tremendous right hand that if he landed square, your ass was going night night. What happens? Frazier goes skittling across the ring on his ass, gets up, glassy eyed, doesn't know what's going on, staring at his dad for advice.
Yeah, they cut to Frazier, and Frazier's like on the rope,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
like
And,
looking like, oh my god.
and Holmes just casually walks over there. And years before, Roy Jones would do the same thing. Starts walking, boom, boom, and then he looks at Mills like he looks at the referee. You want to get in? You want to stop this? No. Boom, boom, boom. You sure you don't want to stop this? Okay. Finally the referee like jumps in and lets it go, and Holmes just walks away like, bro. And it's the saddest thing to see like Frazier get coddled by his dad, and like Joe holding him and saying it's okay, it's okay. And
Yeah, dude. Like, and with all like the father son relationships and boxing and all the, just good gravy, dude. Yeah, just a really sad and pathetic scene. And, so many things coming like that should have been apparent in that moment. Like, dude, you're not a heavyweight. Like you probably shouldn't be fighting at heavyweight. Shouldn't be fighting that style. Like the whole bunch of things, and they just kind of went right back to the drawing board, dude. They went right back to it.
he absolutely should have went down the cruiserweight at that point. Because in 1983, the cruiserweight division would have been wide open for him still. Like De Leon was still champion, but you had other dudes who were just kind of like scoundering around. St. Gordon, I don't think he was champion at that point, but like the division was more or less wide open. You know what I mean? Like there wasn't a top dude over there that like Frazier could have won an IBF belt down at cruiserweight easily, man. Like he could have beat a Ricky Parkey, he could have beat a Leroy Murphy, he could have beat De Leon for instance. He definitely would have beat the corpse of Spinks and other ones. By
Especially because he fought Holmes for so the IBF would have thrown him a bone and been like, "Oh yeah, dude, we'll go down to cruiserweight. We'll help you out for sure." Are you kidding me?
Holy, and it didn't happen, and it's crazy because I get it. The money's at heavyweight. Cruiserweight was rather pedestrian at that point, but you would think if they want to prolong his career and do something, the smart move would be let's put him in a division where he's better at. Like it just would have made more sense. And instead, he just went back on the trail and he had good wins. Again, I'm not going to try to knock him and say like his career was a complete after the Holmes fight, that's when he really started putting together some actually impressive wins. He beat
Yeah.
James Hillis. He beats Bone Crusher Smith, Jose Ribalta, future cruiserweight champ Bernard Benton. Again, guy that went down and won the strap. Like those are good wins. You know what I mean? Like he wasn't like completely dominant in those fights. Like they're all going the distance, showing that he has no power. But like he's on the comeback trail and he's building up a respectable career until again one of the biggest bonehead moves in boxing history, his dad decides after all these wins, hey, let me throw him in with Mike Tyson. A rampaging pre-heavyweight champion Mike Tyson who just has nothing to lose and is looking to put everything on the back burner as like roadkill.
On the dude that he won for that he beat first too actually is I'm looking real quick because I wanted to see, but I want to say it might have been Mickey Duff was his promoter, but Funzo Banjo was a dude who fought over in the UK a bunch and was undefeated at the time and was supposed to be a very good fighter, and Marvis Frazier wound up defeating him.
That's right, 14-0. I see it on the record right here. Yeah.
I'm not positive. I think it was Mickey Duff, but I'm not positive. Regardless, I mean, but yeah, he was one of the totally respectable wins. Like it seemed like, oh, okay, he was kind of getting his shit together. But it's the wrong division, wrong time. Two times in a row for him, dude.
It's bad. And Tyson at this point, he's 24 and he is a menace. Like, you know, this is like at this point the Tyson train is rolling really, really quickly. And no one has seen anything like this since the days of Jack Dempsey. Not Joe Lewis, not Sonny Liston, not any other heavyweight massive power puncher, not even Joe Frazier. Like Tyson had this ferocity about him. that just captivated you or either made you scared for yourself that anytime you watched it, you were going to piss your pants thinking, oh my God, this is the scariest thing I've ever seen in the world? Or you just stood there watching it like people do watching the fucking Faces of Death VHS back in the day. You were just captivated by the violence. You know what I mean? I see you smiling. We all watched Faces of Death back then.
I honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I never did, but I knew what they were because like I had friends who would tell me, so I never got my hands on any or anything, but I knew what
Oh,
they
look, I
were.
mean, trust me, I never owned one, but I had like an older nephew or someone that showed me a couple of
Mhm.
clips when I was a kid. And I was just like, what the fuck?
Well, now that's just fucking Tuesday on Twitter, but like you can fucking see any sort of splattered whatever you want to see. But back in the day, that was
But
some
I mean,
crazy shit.
a
But the point is, yeah, Mike Tyson
Mike
fucking
Tyson
highlight
highlight
clips were
reels,
like that.
that was rivaling a video like that. That's how violent they were back then. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Like,
dude, yeah. Like, if we were watching any sort of shit like that or anything like that happen, my mom walked in the room. Ow, ow, turn that off. Like that type of shit.
just seeing and the way Tyson, after he would like viciously take a guy from the consciousness of the earth and just slam him, and the way he would like after the fight, like sometimes he would help the poor schlub up, but other times you would see him, ah, and just doing shit like that, and you're just kind of like, holy hell, what the.
And you'd be like, oh, that guy's the size of my older brother, and he's
It,
doing that. What the fuck?
you know, like those again, like these weren't world beaters that Tyson was beating, but no one was viciously taking out guys like this, just laying them there in tears, broken faces, broken ribs, like it
Or in a
almost looked
few
like
cases, like broken afros, fools got their fucking shit hit sideways.
Michael Jack Johnson. Yeah.
It's straight up.
Tyson resembled in his prime when you watched a wrestler that was being a monster heel that was being shot to the top. And so every one of his matches had to be the poor jobber laying out and being stretchered out on the canvas, like after just, a massacre. And for whatever reason, Joe Frazier, and you have to think too, like, you read about this fight and you read about Frazier's mentality. This had to do matching him up with Marvis, had to do more with Joe's ego as much as it did with trying to move Marvis ahead. Because everyone's talking about this new monster in Tyson, the ferocity of him. He's knocking everybody out. No one can go the distance with him. Yada yada yada. Like no one's seen shit like this since the days of Jack Dempsey, since the days of Joe Frazier. And Frazier thinks, oh, this kid must be hyped. He can't do this. Blah blah blah. I'm gonna put my kid in with him. Watch, we'll show this that Tyson ain't shit. I'm the real smoking Joe. And he needs to say things beforehand. Oh yeah, Tyson's good. I want to go in the ring with him. I think I can go some rounds with him, see really test him out. Like he had a chip on his shoulder still that he was like mad that they were almost like when Jack Johnson was getting annoyed that Joe Louis was on the scene and taking his thunder away. Kind of similar in the way that, Frazier wasn't as bombastic on the press. I mean, even though he did go on the press and talk a lot of shit about Tyson, how he thought he was kind of whatever. But it's like you get the sense that he kind of threw Marvis in there as to prove a point, but it was just like disastrous.
And yeah, like I started out saying, there's so many father son duos in boxing history that we can point to where I mean it's almost like a fucking Sigmund Freud, stereotype where like fathers vicariously living their own
Yeah,
lives through their sons and which is not, never winds up good and the son never wants and they don't want it for the same reasons and didn't get there the same way, etc. And that's the same type of thing. So I'd like to see it kind of play out in real time. Sad, dude, especially given, how the two biggest fights turned out when Mike Tyson just, I mean, dude, that's one of his more brutal knockouts too, because like Marvis Fraser's just lying in a heap, like in against the
it was
fucking
nasty. It's nasty. It's
just brutal stuff, dude. And he had no chance. And so to see him get like the lights shut out so quickly and easily against a guy who's not even a big heavyweight, it's like just another confirmation that he probably should not have been there in the first place. But in that division in the first place, that is. But and it's unfortunate too because those two fights are what Marvis Frazier is remembered for, and not his very good amateur accomplishments, and the fact that he was a very good fighter. And not his father; he was his own person. But
yeah,
that's the story.
it's crazy too. And something else that has to be mentioned. Frazier, none of this career would have happened had he gone on that flight in 1980 to Poland. He was supposed to be on that flight with the U.S. team that ended up subsequently crashing.
Yep.
Um, it's crazy to think, you know. I mentioned it before on the show. My old trainer, the late great Mr. Vincent, my first boxing trainer, his most prized student that he ever had until Jason Pyers came along was Andre McCoy. Andre McCoy was a top amateur from the late 70s who was a part of that U.S. team that went to Poland. And you know, that wiped out. It's tragic. It wiped out the entire team. So many incredible fighters that are on that are on that flight. Andre, Lemuel Steeples, who definitely would have been a welterweight champion or junior middleweight champion at
Yeah,
some
that
point.
was one of the more hyped fighters there. Yeah.
Steeples was incredible, absolutely brilliant fighter, and the what I say that with no problem, future world champion, absolutely. Andre could have been a future world champion at cruiserweight had he not died. You had Carlos Palomino's brother was on that flight. Paul Palomino, I believe his name was, and a bunch of other notable fighters. Also, too, Sarge Johnson, who was the famed head trainer of the '76 team, he was on that flight, um, and others. But anyways, the story
And
goes. Sorry.
another little tiny piece of trivia too is that there were like several really high level classical musicians on that flight too that died.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Interesting. And Frazier, before that flight, yeah, I guess he had a dream that he said, right? Frazier Sr., Joe Frazier, that was, had a dream that there was a plane crash or there was some type of crash that Marvis got killed in or some kind of disaster. He had a dream. And after he came from that, he told Marvis that he wasn't comfortable with them going on that flight and they didn't want him to go. That's always been the story. And Marvis subsequently didn't go because of that.
It's
And
crazy.
then the other heavyweight too, that you mentioned that Marvis was supposed to fight as a pro, Jimmy Clark. He was supposed to be on that flight as well. And the joke about Jimmy Clark was that he was late to everything to the point that someone joked he'd be late to his own funeral. And he ended up being late to the airport and missing his flight.
And I think James Schuler was supposed to be,
Like James Sula was supposed to be on that flight. Bobby Ches was supposed to be on that flight.
yeah,
Um,
like there were but I mean, and over the years there have probably been a number of fighters who claimed they were supposed to but weren't actually. But nonetheless, yeah, that was as like earth shattering as that was at the time, dude. Nobody ever talks about that now, like ever.
I mean, yeah, it's been 44 years. We're actually coming up on the anniversary because it happened this month.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. Marvis was definitely he came along at the wrong time for a heavyweight, and he just was not the right size, wrong family too, I guess, in a number of ways. But
Yes.
still,
He has to, man. Like, I love Joe Frazier as a fighter and nothing against him like that, but it has to be said he might be one of the single worst managers in boxing history. It is what it is.
yeah,
For
dude.
various reasons, not even what he did with Marvis, just then as overall that he handled most of his family and their careers. Like he never developed anybody. He never developed anyone
No.
into being like a future champion, not even like a regional champ or like nothing big. Like it just all of them ended up as disastrous for one reason or another. And then like the guys who ended up getting success weren't so much under his umbrella. Like Schuler was trained by Eddie Futch
Yeah,
and had
almost everybody who had actual success got away from him a little bit because
yeah,
he was
you know,
not his and I don't know if it was pride. I've heard people say that he had an alcohol problem in photos. Looking back, it seems like he probably did. But I've also heard, biographers be like, "Oh no, he never touched a drink of alcohol," and I'm like, pretty sure there are photos of him, and he was a fucking
literally
like
photos of him at the bar. Yeah, I
and he
know
was like
that.
a beer spokesperson, whatever. But in any case, it sure seemed like he wanted to have a hand, like a direct hand in a number of these fighters' careers, and it didn't wind up good when he did. Like he was so specialized, dude. Like his style and how he made it work for him was so like it worked for him. That was it. It didn't wasn't gonna work for everybody. And so the way that he tried to kind of implement that did not help, unfortunately. And he was not a good manager in that regard.
Exactly.
Definitely not.
Absolutely.
Let's see. I've got time at least for one more. but this one probably won't take a ton of discussing here. But it was one that you had mentioned too, and I think it was a good one to mention, a good one to bring up because it also allows us to talk about a slightly different time when things were very different, and that's James Jeffries, James J. Jeffries, or I'm
Jim.
I've brought this up before, but motherfuckers called him Jimma to Jeff. Why? What were they thinking back then? They were
Am I the
crazy.
Jeff?
Jimma to Jeff. The
I
fuck, bro? I don't know. He was super popular though. Another
just know him as a
fighter.
Boilermaker.
Yeah, he was an alfalfa farmer who I guess had also done some Boilermaker work and all this sorts of shit. So he was also just kind of like an everyman. The type of fighter and the type of guy who was like a man of the people type of guy. Unfortunately, also drew the color line, but so not a man of all of the people. Unfortunately, just a man of some of the people. And but even so, you know what? I didn't even look to see exactly how many fights it was when he won the heavyweight championship. I know it was like 4 or 5 years, but it wasn't very. Let's see, look real quick. 12 fights. So he'd had 12. That's pretty damn close to Leon Spink's 8 or 9. But like I was saying a moment ago, things were very different back then. And so even though he had only had 12 fights over the course of 4 or 5 years, like I had mentioned to you off of the show, the guy had tons of exhibitions. And on top of even exhibitions that are listed, I've mentioned this before, go to Cyber Boxing Zone. Cyber Boxing Zone for a number of different fighters lists exhibition wrestling matches and other non-actual, professional fights. And so it's a good guide for a lot of that stuff. But even Cyber Boxing Zone doesn't mention a lot of Jeffrey's exhibitions and other, non-listed matches because he toured on kind of vaudeville tours, which was, see, back in the day, I apologize, taking a little detour here, little late 1800s, early 1900s detour so people can understand, how different the sport was at this time. The pay extremely different. When several decades after James Jeffries, when all of a sudden fighters started fighting, twice a week, 3 times a week, 5 times a week type of shit, they did that not because they just wanted to fight, bro. They needed the money because they were not getting paid shit. And you had to fight that often to get paid or to get the recognition. It had nothing to do with, oh, I just think I want to fucking fight 9 times this month. What? Nobody wants to fucking do that. They had to, but differently. So again, rewinding back to James Jeffries, they were able to command slightly larger purses in a time where larger purses were, buying them a whole lot more than even just 2 decades later in the 1920s when shit economically and financially was getting kind of funky. So in the days of James Jeffries, he was able to finagle these, seldom fights, but then in the meanwhile, tour, give exhibitions, give all these sorts of little demonstrations that he would get paid for. And back in the day when that was an actual fucking thing. And so that's how a lot of fighters made their money. That's how James Jeffries made his money, giving demonstrations and shit like that. And so in any case, James Jeffries, though, like I said, his main thing was not even necessarily fighting. He was an alfalfa farmer who had bought land in just somewhere, I think I want to say a little bit north of LA or something like that. And one of the structures that he had was still standing a few years ago. Like, he had a barn that he used to stage fights in, but that's getting off topic even a little bit more. Moving his way to the heavyweight championship, a lot of stuff in the late 1800s was wide open. The concept of a gloved heavyweight champion was still very new. John L. Sullivan was the American bare knuckle champion for a number of years. He wound up kind of consolidating that championship by defeating Patty Ryan. Or, some people kind of have a different view of the timeline, but pretty much everybody agrees that James Corbett then became the first kind of gloved era heavyweight champion, and so forth. And then Bob Fitzsimmons, James Jeffries. So it was still very new. Things hadn't really been established as far as how often should a champion fight, how often they need to defend this claim type of thing. Nobody really knew. And so this being new, like I said, the division was fairly wide open. And the guy who was the heavyweight champion at this time, Bob Fitzsimmons, was the former middleweight champion. And so, and he was also tiny for a heavyweight champion. He was not a big guy. He was like 5'11, spindly, weighed like a buck, 65, soaking fucking wet, half bald, covered in freckles, but he looked scary also from behind because he had a massive back and he was a fucking blacksmith. But
He would
beyond
cave your
that,
face in and your body in with one punch.
and yeah, he'd knock your ass out. He just didn't look like shit. So nobody knew what to expect. Nobody knew what to expect because this guy was the former middleweight champion. And then you look at James Jeffries, who was, not a lot taller than Bob Fitzsimmons, but way thicker, just a much larger fucking guy. And when he was getting a hold of his opponents and getting in close, he was beating the absolute shit out of them. And so, like a lot of people were looking forward to what this beefcake looking motherfucker from the late 1800s could do. I've said before, he was considered like the ideal male for like 20 years. People were like, if you want to be a beefcake, you'd be James Jeffries. So in any case, he led, it was a very funky
It's
landscape.
a Brutus beefcake.
Yeah, the barber fucking beefcake, fucking
So, Jeffries, the only time I guess he didn't draw the colored line was when, his opponent was extremely sick, like Peter Jackson, whose poor guy was on his deathbed when he got called to fight Jeffries.
yeah,
But
in the throes of tuberculosis.
that's crazy. But would you call Jeffries the catalyst for what the modern heavyweight would end up looking like? Because, like you said, you think about the era, and you had a guy like Sullivan who wasn't big. I mean, like he was thick, but he wasn't like massive or
No,
anything.
he
He
wasn't a big guy.
wasn't a big guy. And then you have Corbett, again, not a really a big guy, wouldn't be a heavyweight today. Um, and then you see Fitzsimmons, same thing, like a guy that's not a big dude. Then you see Jeffries, who's noticeably bigger than all of his predecessors at that point. And he wouldn't be the biggest dude in comparison today. There's guys that would massively be much bigger than him. I mean, taller wise, but like in terms of his size at that point, how thick he was, and everything like that, just his general mass, no one had really seen a heavyweight at that point like him. You know what I mean? Like he was just a different. And with the turn of the century, it was almost like seeing something like that. You're just kind of like, wow, this is the modern, like you said, the modern man, the modern heavyweight. This is, I mean, how it's going to look going forward.
Yeah. There's a really good book that I got. It was written a handful of years ago. Lewis Moore, you know him from Twitter. He wrote a book called "I Fight for a Living" that goes into this a lot more in depth than I will now. But James Jeffries was held up, especially by white America, as like this is the ideal male. Like this is like he's a gentleman. He's a cowboy because that's he dressed in like overalls and a cowboy hat, and if you look at a lot of like casual photos from back in the day, he had the little fucking alfalfa sprout in his mouth, with the like, the thing we look at now is like stupid hayseed fucking bumpkin. Like, but they people were, you know what I'm saying? Like now that's a stereotype. People are like, look at this guy. But back then they held that up as like, oh, he's a gentleman, he's a cowboy, he's hardworking, he's muscular, and of course for them above all, he was white. Like that was the best thing for them. But that was what was held up as the ideal fucking male, the ideal guy. That's what you should look like. That's what you should act like. People will love you, etc. And so, he became a cultural icon in that regard. But unfortunately, after he won the heavyweight championship from Bob Fitzsimmons, whom, Bob Fitzsimmons still, because he was so skilled, managed to work James Jeffries over quite a bit and, was within like a hair of kicking his ass and stopping him. But James Jeffries was just, according to all accounts, well, and as we saw later against Jack Johnson too, he could absorb punishment. He was tough as fucking nails. And, he wound up coming back and basically taking over, taking the heavyweight championship. And for a lot of people, especially Americans, because Bob Fitzsimmons was not American, now the heavyweight champion was American again. It was a big thing. So yeah, I mean, he was fast tracked to the title in that regard and then beloved.
There's no footage of Fitzsimmons against Jeffries. I think there's been rumors that the one that fight might have been filmed, or Jeffries Corbett was filmed or something. It's been lost to time, whatever. But You get the sense when you read about the account of both of their fights, especially the rematch of Fitzsimmons Jeffries, that it's almost like boxcar so and so fighting Homer Simpson from that episode. Where the dude just literally beats the shit out of Homer each and every round over and over and over
Yeah,
and over
until he just wears himself out beating
until
his
he wears
ass.
himself out with
That's what
nothing.
it sounds like.
And especially in the rematch, I mean, the rematch is like a gory account that they said Fitzsimmons cut Jeffries above and below his eyes to the point where like he was
Yeah.
almost home. He busted his mouth, broke his nose, broke his rib, like just beat him to the point where it looked like he was a mugging victim with like five people beating him with
Yeah, in
bats.
any other era, this fight would have been long over.
Yeah, yeah, like Corbett. I mean, not Corbett. Fitzsimmons just beat the shit out of him, like worse than he ever beat any opponent in his life. And Jeffries just took it, like Rocky. Like that scene where Tony's talking to Apollo Creed. The man just kept coming and coming and
Let
coming.
it go.
Let it go. Like yeah, that was almost the same thing. Well, Court finally, you know, Fitzsimmons' hands are probably swollen with the like goddamn I don't know skin tight gloves they were wearing back then, and he's just there exhausted. Like, what the fuck else can I do? And Jeffries, swept him up really quick, and then same thing happens when he fights Corbett. Corbett comes out of retirement now to fight Jeffries. And Corbett hadn't really been active in years at that point. The last time he was really active was losing the title to Fitzsimmons. And then I think he fought Tom Sharkey, who was another durable, crazy asshole from that era that sounded like was awful to fight and was almost run out of the ring. So, by all accounts, I don't think a lot of people weren't expecting him to do much with Jeffries. But in that first fight, Corbett was slapping up Jeffries as well. He wasn't doing the same type of damage that Fitzsimmons was doing because not few humans could, but he was basically looking like the Corbett of old. And they're saying making Jeffries look absolutely oafish. You know what I mean? Like he was in there, Jeffries was swinging wildly and falling to a corner, tripping over himself, and didn't know what was going on. And Corbett was looking as good as apparently as he did in the Sullivan fight. And people were getting all excited and watching him and looking how good he was and all this other shit. And Jeffrey's just eating punches and eating punches like they're M&Ms until finally, same thing. He keeps on coming and coming and coming. And Corbett, who was never known as Mr. Durability to begin with, got hit with a few shots and just folded.
Yeah, got the fucking pompadour knocked off his head.
Good. Fuck Corbett. Like,
Fucking dickhead. All these
racist.
guys, bunch of racists.
Yeah, but I mean, Corbett was especially, he had
Yeah, he was an ass. You and I have talked about this shit, dude. Corbett had a massive feud with Bob Fitzsimmons, who, like, I mean, Fitzsimmons had his own problems in that regard, but he definitely had him in the trash talk fucking arena. It was fucking, oh man, yeah. I mean,
definitely would have beat his ass outside the ring. I mean, come on. Well, you see Corbett there with his little proper look and his stupid top hat and his whole, again, probably
he tried to hit him with a cane or something, dude. He's a bitch.
like that, always talking stuff. But a photo I absolutely love is the one during Jeffries Johnson. And you see Corbett ringside, I think immediately after the fight, and he looks so pissed off. Like he's standing near Sullivan and he has this big, stupid, concorded face on him, looking like he's filled his diaper up because he's so babyish about it.
Yeah, dude. That I mean, and that's what's kind of crazy is that over the course of what I think it was 4 or 5 years as champion, Jeffries makes 8 or 9 defenses, which is unheard of at the time too. And even though it was kind of stretched out over a little bit of a period of time, it was still unheard of though, because I mean, there wasn't really they hadn't had a dominant heavyweight champion like that, like then nobody that hadn't happened. And so Jeffries again had kind of cemented his status as a beloved figure, retired undefeated as heavyweight champion. His fight with Tom Sharkey, the 25 round fight, that was for like 3 4 decades considered the greatest heavyweight fight of all time. And that was basically in contention with Dempsey Firpo. As soon as Dempsey Firpo happened, that's what the old timers used to argue. I don't know, Dempsey Firpo was good, but was it as good as fucking Jeffries, Sharkey? That's what
I
they
was
used to
watching
say.
Tom Sharkey, Jim Jeffries, and the overhead lights. the bulbs were breaking and they were falling. I actually read those. You read that account, right? The bulbs were breaking and burning them on their head and their
Yeah,
shoulders.
they're getting fucking burns on their shoulders and shit.
Yeah.
The
And I mean,
fuck?
and if you look at the photos from that fight, like it's from the it's the 1900s. So I mean, you're not looking at great quality, but you can even see through the graininess, you can see the damage that both guys put on each other.
Oh
So you can
yeah, dude.
imagine if it was a like a high definition film camera or some shit that was filming that.
It
Because
was yeah, that's how good it was that just word of mouth kept the shit alive for decades.
you can see the photo. There's a photo of them clinching near the end of the fight, and you just see like it looks like plums, like dark, dark plums are like, masses of welts and blood all over both of their faces. And you can see kind of the welts on their body. Like they look like they just been through fucking hell and back, you know? And I'm sure it wasn't the most exciting fight. I'm sure there was a lot of mauling and plotting and inside brawling and all that other stuff going
Especially,
on.
yeah, given Sharky and his little wrestling ass. Yeah.
Absolutely. It was probably an ugly, tough fight to watch, but brutal. Absolutely brutal in the sense of what it was. And you're totally right, man. Jeffries was the first one to be fast tracked like that, and the first heavyweight champion, to his credit, to really defend against a host of contenders. Not like Sullivan doing a barnstorming across the country. I challenge any man to go 4 rounds with me, and
Or
I'll get
even
dollars.
or even, right after fucking what's his name? Marvin or come on, Tommy Burns, where he had like fucking like 90 defenses, but it was against the same four guys, you know?
Well, that's interesting too because Tommy Burns is the only heavyweight champion from that era to forego the vaudeville stage. Everybody back then, immediately after they became champion, took the stage. Like you had Jack Johnson took off on the road, even though he was making title defenses, but they were like more sporadic. Um, Marvin Hart, I don't think Marvin Hart was champion long enough to go on the
Yeah, I don't know if that counts.
go on the road. Just imagine him though. Like I don't think there's any footage of him, but just by photos of what you see of him and how like goofy he looked. Imagine.
Dude, dude, and I will say Jeffries kind of pulled a shithead move with that too. Because like if you read the newspaper accounts, basically for days and days, he's like, oh yeah, this is gonna crown the new champion. And then immediately after it happens, he's like, I never said that, never said it, never claimed it in my life. And people were
He
like,
refereed the
what?
fight too, didn't he?
Yeah, he was there and raised the dude's hand. And he was like, no, never had any involvement. It's like, God damn, dude, you're disavowing that
That was
quickly?
my brother Jack, not me.
Yeah, dude, fucking terrible.
And
But
then anyway, so like, yeah, he was the one champion that was on that didn't that forego that. Tommy Burns was, for that matter. But like you said, he fought the same dudes over and over and over. He fought Billy Squires, who I think was from Australia. Um,
yeah, he
a giant
defended against the same
right?
guy on three different
Defended against
continents,
Billy
dude.
Squires against like 4 or 5 different times. Fought Gunnar Moyer 2 or 3 times. Fought a
Yeah,
host of other ones.
he de-
Philadelphia Jack O'Brien, which was probably the most legit fighter of that era that he fought for the title.
he
Fought
defended
him.
against the same guy three times on three different continents.
Yeah.
Like, come on, dude.
Well,
Find
Jack
somebody
Johnson
else.
was chasing him around on a ferry. You know what I mean?
Well, and that's why Jack Johnson wound up beating his ass because he was like, "Bitch, you made me chase you. Now I'm gonna beat your ass," and he did.
He did, and again too, you have that narrative story that the cops stopped it because of so and so round from what's Burns absorbing too much punishment. That's all bullshit. That's one of those other theories that came out from these old timer historians, and probably actually Bill Kane might have been the one to spin that one because he wanted to say that he had full footage of the fight and he didn't, because when the fight gets clipped at that moment when you see Burns wobbling a little bit and then they're like, at this moment cops stop the footage and
Yeah,
stop the fight and blah, blah, blah. That wasn't
the
footage.
classic video that where it goes blip and stop, and it goes, it was right at this moment where the police
Yes,
stepped in. It's like if you read the local accounts from Australia, that's not what it says.
at all. And it's funny too because like as a kid I believed it. Why wouldn't I didn't know any better. You know what I mean? For years I thought that was the case of it
Yeah,
until you
now we
start
actually have access to that shit, so we call
exactly. And
bullshit
you
on these
start
old
doing
fools.
research and you start listening and reading other accounts from either locally or reading other historians' accounts. That's bullshit. That fight went on. Like, you know,
Well, and that's the kind of damage, even though like, obviously this is not real world, nobody's getting hurt by this information, but nonetheless, it's incorrect where like all of these old historians, dude, are pushing these narratives that like just never got checked. And even to this day, even though we know better and they aren't factual, when we say they're not factual because of the shit that these old historians said, they're like, no, that's not how Bert Sugar described it. Well, dude, did it ever occur to you that Bert Sugar was mistaken? It happens. Like it fucking happens. But that's what happens when you play the old game of telephone and call it history. But
No, no, no. Sugar Ray Robinson was 180-0 as an amateur, okay? He knocked out everybody he fought, and no
people
one came
still
close to
say that.
beating him.
They
Yeah.
still say it.
The only time he ever lost was the first time to Jake LaMotta, all right?
People believe and say crazy shit, but that's part of the reason why we do this stuff is not so much this show because this is more fun. Like I don't think we were necessarily dropping massive facts or anything on the show, but
I was just talking, but Jeffries after he retired after the Johnson fight, he went back to his farm and apparently hosted a very popular nightclub, more or less, called Jeffrey's Barn.
yep,
All right, yeah,
there's
and
some photos. There's some real
yes,
cool photos.
yeah, yeah, there are, and I think he pulled the color line at that point too, because I know he had some different acts in there
Yeah.
performing. But like, yeah, there are photos of like old man Jim Jeffries at that place, sitting in the audience or sitting up front or whatever it is, and whatever he was hosting. But apparently, it was a popping place.
It was right off the side of some freeway up there. I don't remember which one or exactly where. I just know that it was like right off the side of like a freeway or highway. And he had a barn, a big ass barn, and would host fights, acts, all sorts of stuff. And there's some pretty cool photos if you go look. I mean,
There was one photo there from like some guy. I don't. He was a performer called Sabu or something. Not the wrestler from
I was
ECW.
like, wait a sec.
No, not that
He
one.
goes back a long time.
Not Sabu and the Sheik. Well, even though that would be fucking amazing. Yeah,
This barn is jabroni.
yeah, but no, there was some guy that was an act that was going there, and like you said, you see Jeffries in his suit and his cane, watching the proceedings with, I guess, his entourage.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things I don't like about the history. There are a lot of things that, we should call out, but nonetheless, it's a very interesting portion of history for sure.
Yeah. So
Yeah, dude. I mean, I think that's, I guess about the time we have. It's probably a good 2 hours or so. But I don't know, man. I'm not gonna lie to you. I am a little bit excited for Joshua Ngannou. Like, not, it's not got doesn't get me hyped like a massive fight does, but I'm a little excited for it.
I mean, I think it's kind of fallen under the radar this week too, with like,
It's
you
on a
know,
weird day
fight week.
too.
It's on a Friday, yeah, but it's also too with the craziness that's been going on this week. If you've been following the shenanigans of Ryan Garcia and his meltdown, and then when that finally looked like it ceases, all of a sudden today we get the fucking bombshell that Jake Paul is going to somehow fight Mike Tyson. So it's been a wild news week. It's been a big news
Yeah,
week, and
dude.
with Joshua and Ngannou both not being big personalities, like it's a big fight, but neither one of these guys are like going over the top in terms of insulting anybody. Like
Yep.
the only thing I've seen about this fight this week didn't even really have anything to do with their actual fight. It was Ngannou threatening to kill Fury in MMA,
Which
so,
he would.
which he absolutely would in a second.
Oh
But I
man. And the butt hurt boxing fans are coming in and saying, no, boxing's the first thing you need to know. Dude, he would absolutely pitch him up down a cliff. Are you kidding me? Easily.
And you know
Easily.
what? And the reason why I know that like Fury was kind of shook by all that, if you notice, Fury's dad, who's always yelling about all kinds of dumb shit, no matter where, anytime, any place, didn't have a fucking thing to say. Just sat there
Even
shaking.
Fury was kind of quiet for him. Like he was
They
saying
both were
stuff
weird.
back,
They
but he
both
was
were
like,
quiet. Yeah.
he didn't get up and like get in his face or anything. He was just like in his head, he was probably thinking, yeah, you'd probably fucking hook me up. And he would. He would real bad. So good
I
choice.
said it to you yesterday, bro, when we were already messaging each other about that. The only way Fury ever beats him in an MMA ring is in the UFC video game. And even
Oh
then, I'm
god.
not even sure. Fury has a good chance is probably going to get fucking lamped in that too. So
Dude, yeah, it would not be a contest, but no, you're right. I think that that's a good point, dude. It has kind of gone under the radar because neither of them are like big talkers. They're not drawing attention and like, oh, fuck this, and that type of stuff. So it has kind of gone under the radar. It also makes me wonder though, too, like what state of mind AJ's in and how he's approaching this fight. He has had a very lively career himself. Like he's had quite the career. So I'm definitely, kind of excited for this fight. I appreciate you taking the time out though, man. It's a
Absolutely.
fun show.
Always have a blast.
All right, everybody. Well, we definitely got the show back on the podcast apps. I know that Spotify is for whatever taking a long time, but it's working. Nonetheless, we do appreciate you guys tuning in. If you do listen through the podcast apps, go and subscribe, give us a rating, thumbs up, leave us a message, those sorts of things. Same thing with YouTube. If you watch, subscribe, leave us a message, all that sorts of stuff. As far as social media goes, we are both on Twitter/X for as long as it's still up. My buddy Aris Pina is on his Punch Zone Aris. I'm there as the Boxing History Show. Knuckles of Gloves is also on Facebook and Instagram, so follow us there. And Aris, talk soon, bro.
Have a good one, y'all. Enjoy the fights tomorrow.
For sure.